Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku. Back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Deku Joined the League of Villains? Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. In this story, Deku harbored a deep admiration for villains, a secret that remained unknown to everyone around him. He maintained a notebook titled Hero Analysis for the Future, but to fit in with societal expectations, he concealed his true feelings by pretending to idolize heroes. Throughout the narrative, Deku was portrayed as quirkless, yet he excelled in throwing and controlling knives, leading many to believe that his abilities were linked to some form of quirk. Deku adopted the villainous persona of the Reaper, and his outfit was left to the imagination of the reader, allowing for creative interpretations. After Bakugo was accepted into UA, Deku's activities escalated, catching the attention of the League of Villains. Although he did not officially work with them, he occasionally visited their bar to see if there were any targets they needed eliminated. The police remained baffled by the Reaper's identity, as anyone who had seen his face was no longer alive. They suspected a connection to the League but lacked concrete evidence, only knowing that the Reaper was exceptionally skilled with knives and surprisingly fast and strong for someone who did not appear muscular. Following Bakugo's acceptance into UA, Deku mysteriously vanished, leading many to believe he was dead. Bakugo searched tirelessly for him, feeling a deep sense of regret for not treating him better when he had the chance. Each year, on Deku's birthday and the anniversary of his disappearance, Bakugo was consumed by sadness, reflecting on the lost opportunities for kindness. Deku had been training for his life as a villain for as long as he could remember. He was physically strong and intelligent, possessing street smarts rather than traditional book knowledge. His relentless efforts propelled him to become one of the most feared villains in Japan. The narrative began with Deku entering the League's bar, where he approached Kurogiri, ignoring the other members present. He inquired about any new targets, and Shigaraki, visibly annoyed by Deku's disregard, suggested All Might. However, Deku dismissed the suggestion, noting that All Might was not a new name on the list. Another voice chimed in, proposing Endeavor as a target. Intrigued by the challenge, Deku contemplated the best approach to eliminate the number 2 hero. After weeks of tracking Endeavor and studying his schedule, Deku decided that the following day would be the day he would make his move. The next morning, he woke up early, preparing himself for the confrontation. He positioned himself behind a building, gripping his knife tightly as he heard the heavy footsteps of Endeavor approaching. As he leaped out to surprise Endeavor, the hero reacted quickly, narrowly avoiding the blade. In the ensuing struggle, Endeavor managed to grab Deku's arm, activating his quirk and leaving a burn mark. Seizing the opportunity, Deku used Endeavor's grip to propel himself upward, breaking free. Armed with a knife in each hand, he lunged at Endeavor, managing to inflict several cuts before needing to retreat to avoid further burns. Surrounded by flames, Deku felt the heat sapping his strength. Realizing he needed to end the fight quickly, he drew 2 more knives from his sleeve and hurled them at Endeavor, aiming for critical points. As he collapsed to his knees, he caught a glimpse of Endeavor falling beside him, the metallic scent of blood filling the air before he lost consciousness. Meanwhile, a passerby, having had a rough day at work, stumbled upon the scene. He was shocked to find Endeavor, the renowned pro hero, knocked out and bleeding. In a state of panic, he decided to call the authorities, unsure of what else to do in such a dire situation. The day had taken a surprising turn, shifting from an ordinary Thursday to a chaotic scene involving a nearly lifeless pro hero. As the paramedics arrived, they placed the other injured individual on a stretcher and transported him to an ambulance. Endeavor was also taken away, receiving medical attention as the situation unfolded. Deku slowly began to regain consciousness, his eyes fluttering open to the harsh brightness of the room. He attempted to lift his arms to shield his eyes but found that they were restrained. The realization of being immobilized quickly overshadowed his discomfort with the light. He struggled to sit up but was unable to do so, his legs and chest secured by straps, and his hands bound to the headboard with what felt like rope. The bed was small, covered with white sheets, but the room did not resemble a typical hospital setting. A cough broke the silence, drawing Deku's attention to the 5 adults standing across the room. 2 of them were familiar faces, while the others were strangers. Among them was All Might, a figure he recognized instantly. After a prolonged silence, one of the adults introduced himself as Nizu, the principal of UA Academy, and mentioned that a detective wished to ask Deku some questions. Deku expressed his reluctance to answer while still restrained, insisting that he could not respond properly in such a state. Nizu agreed to release him from his bindings, but only if he promised not to attempt anything. Deku assured them of his compliance, and the individual named Aizawa, who appeared disheveled and weary, released him from the restraints. Once free, Deku sat up and stretched his limbs, glancing at the group with curiosity. He sensed their unease at his movements, likely due to his recent confrontation with Endeavor. He wondered about the pro-hero's condition but decided to hold off on asking for now. The detective took a seat near the bed, maintaining a safe distance. He pulled out a clipboard, aiming to appear professional, and began with a straightforward question about Deku's name. Deku smirked, responding with a fictitious name, John Doe, which elicited a frustrated reaction from the detective. Aizawa intervened, suggesting that there was no point in pressing the issue if Deku was unwilling to answer. The detective shifted his approach, inquiring about Deku's villain name. This was a question Deku had anticipated. With a grin, he declared himself the Reaper, enjoying the moment as he noticed All Might's brief flicker of concern. The detective's hand trembled as he wrote down the name, clearly unsettled by the reputation it carried. When asked about his age, Deku casually stated that he was 15, which surprised the adults in the room. The detective continued with his questions, asking how long Deku had been a villain. Deku reflected on his past, noting that he had always aspired to be a villain, but he officially recognized his identity as such only after his first kill, which he estimated to be about 4 years ago. The detective pressed on, asking if Deku was affiliated with the League of Villains. Deku dismissed the notion, explaining that he found the League filled with immature adults, while he considered himself an unhinged child, emphasizing the distinction. As the interrogation continued, the detective posed a particularly sensitive question about Deku's kill count. The atmosphere grew tense, and Deku could sense the anticipation in the room. He locked eyes with All Might and sarcastically questioned the need for such a statistic, suggesting that keeping track of kills was a sign of a deeper issue. He noted that while others might have a count of around 15, he was not inclined to provide a number, leaving the adults in the room caught off guard by his response. The detective leaned in, curious about the information he had gathered. He asked if the individual had more than 15. The response came with a slight inclination toward secrecy, as the individual lowered their voice and questioned whether the detective found pleasure in counting people's kill counts at night. The detective quickly denied it, clearly taken aback. The individual, maintaining a casual demeanor, decided to turn the tables and pose a question of their own. They inquired about the number of innocents the detective had murdered. The detective hesitated, explaining that not all of those he had dealt with were innocent. Many had made enemies, and those enemies had paid for their demise. Others were simply individuals the world could do without. The detective's patience began to wear thin as the individual pressed for a specific count. They smirked, enjoying the banter, and mentioned the number of bounties they typically handled each week, along with the collateral damage that came with their line of work over the past 4 years. When asked for a total, the individual shrugged, indicating that the detective would have to do the math themselves. An awkward silence filled the room, interrupted only by the sound of a pen scratching against paper. The detective then posed a question about the individual's own death count. The response was firm. The individual had no interest in knowing that information. If they had wanted to keep track, they would have done so. The atmosphere shifted as Nizu, the principal, unexpectedly stated that they had their work cut out for them. Confusion washed over the individual, prompting Nizu to elaborate on a new villain rehabilitation program at UA. This initiative aimed to help young villains, like the individual, reform and potentially become decent citizens or even heroes. The individual couldn't help but laugh at the notion of becoming the world's best hero, finding the idea absurd. However, they quickly regained their composure, expressing a preference for jail over the proposed program. Nizu, undeterred, informed them that they would be placed in Mr. Aizawa's class, Class 1A. With the weekend ahead, the individual would have time to settle into their dorm and meet their new classmates. As Nizu exited with all might and the detective, Aizawa and recovery girl remained in the room. The individual realized they were in the nurse's office, and Aizawa handed them a metal bracelet, which appeared to be a quirk cancellation cuff. Amused by the assumption that they possessed a powerful quirk, the individual put it on as a joke. Aizawa instructed them to follow, and they complied, knowing it was wise to stay on their teacher's good side. As they walked through the hallways, Aizawa spoke about the consequences of violence, but the individual was preoccupied with thoughts of Kaken, a former friend. Suddenly, a gut feeling prompted them to ask about a presence following them. Aizawa confirmed it was Ms. Midnight, warning that any misbehavior would result in sleep. The individual acknowledged the warning and continued walking, noticing scorch marks on their clothes from a recent encounter. They rolled up their sleeve to check for a burn mark, relieved to find it had healed. After a brief time skip, they arrived outside the Heights Alliance buildings. Aizawa instructed them to wait in the main lobby area before meeting the other students. The individuals settled onto a couch, waiting for the next chapter of their life to unfold. Meanwhile, in another part of the school, Todoroki was studying with Yayorozu when Aizawa entered the dorm area, looking somewhat disheveled. He glanced at Kaminari and Shiro, who were engrossed in a video game, and ordered the rest of the class to gather immediately. The two students jumped into action, rallying their classmates. Once everyone had assembled, Aizawa prepared to announce the arrival of a new student. Excitement bubbled among the group, but Aizawa's sharp command for silence cut through the chatter. He urged them to let him finish his explanation before they erupted into noise again. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as they awaited the details of the newcomer. A new student was about to join the hero course, and the revelation that he was a villain caused a stir of gasps and confusion among the students. Many wondered why a villain would be attending a school for heroes. From the back of the classroom, Ida expressed his concerns, highlighting the potential danger of having a villain among them. His statement sent a shiver through the room as the gravity of the situation settled in. The teacher, Aizawa, sought to clarify the situation. He explained that the villain was a teenager, just 15 years old, and that the school was initiating a villain rehabilitation program. Nizu believed this student could be a perfect candidate for it. Although the villain wore a quirk cancellation cuff, he was physically strong. Aizawa reassured the students that if they worked together and remained cautious, they would have a good chance of surviving any potential attacks. With questions answered, Aizawa prepared to bring in the new student, cautioning everyone to behave appropriately. As he left the room, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation and uncertainty. Students whispered among themselves, some adjusting their hair, unsure of what to expect. Meanwhile, the new student, Deku, sat in the waiting area, feeling bored and restless. He searched his sleeves for any hidden weapons but found nothing. The professionals had even confiscated the knives hidden in his shoes. When Aizawa opened the door, he gestured for Deku to follow him. Climbing the stairs to the third floor, Deku entered the dorm room, where 19 anxious students awaited his arrival. As the door closed behind him, Deku stood before the crowd of aspiring heroes, feeling a mix of amusement and disdain at their nervousness. Among them, he spotted Kaken, who looked shocked and confused. A smile crept across Deku's face, relishing the moment. Kaken, unable to comprehend the situation, stammered in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the image of the hero-loving Deku with the villains standing before him. Deku reveled in the irony, knowing that everyone believed he was a hero at heart. He took a step closer to Kaken, who instinctively backed away. Aizawa, noticing the tension, asked Kaken for the villain's name. Kaken hesitated, realizing he was the only one who recognized Deku. Before he could answer, Deku lunged at him, attempting to pin him down. The move was swift, and Kaken fell backward, caught off guard. As soon as Kaken hit the ground, Deku found himself restrained by a scarf, immobilized. A red-haired boy rushed to help Kaken, but he refused assistance, displaying his usual arrogance. With his movements restricted, Deku could do nothing to prevent Kaken from revealing his identity. Frustration bubbled within him as Kaken finally spoke, disclosing his name. Deku felt a mix of anger and resignation. He had hoped to keep his identity a secret, but now it was out. The red-haired boy suddenly recognized the name, recalling that Deku had been missing the previous year. With a hint of pride, Deku requested that Aizawa release him from the restraints, promising not to attack any more students. Once freed, Deku stretched his arms and shoulders, enjoying the freedom. He acknowledged his past, confirming that he was indeed the missing child, but warned the students not to underestimate him. He had taken lives, more than many heroes had saved, and he was not to be taken lightly. As he turned to face the wall, the room fell silent, tension thick in the air. One student broke the silence, asking how many people Deku had killed. With a smile, he leaned against the wall and revealed the number, relishing the shock it brought. The feeling of horror radiating from the students was intoxicating, a rush he couldn't resist. Meanwhile, Aizawa appeared weary, clearly wishing to end the encounter. Deku turned to Aizawa, inquiring about his sleeping arrangements. Aizawa, with a tired expression, instructed him to follow. As they walked through the crowd, Deku made eye contact with several students, enjoying their frightened reactions. The thrill of the moment filled him with exhilaration as he embraced his new role in the hero course. Aizawa guided Deku to his room, explaining the rules regarding his confinement. He would not be permitted to leave from 11 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., ensuring that he would not wander the dorms at night. This arrangement was also a precaution. If Deku exhibited any dangerous behavior, he could be kept in his room for safety. That night, Deku lay awake, contemplating his circumstances. He wondered how he might escape and how he would confront Kaken. He was also determined to avoid becoming one of those self-righteous heroes. The room itself was quite basic, featuring black bed sheets and a window secured with bars and a sensor that would trigger an alarm if opened. Inside the room, there was a desk, a chair, and a dresser. As Deku rummaged through the dresser, he found only uniforms. Frustrated, he searched through more drawers and discovered some casual clothing. He changed into more comfortable attire, discarding the villain outfit that still bore scorch marks. After completing his nightly routine, Deku settled into bed. The next morning he slowly opened his eyes, memories of the previous day flooding back. He sat up and stretched, glancing at the alarm clock which read 10 a.m. Mornings had never been his strong suit. He preferred to operate under the cover of darkness. The thought of his past actions stirred a craving within him. He dressed in a chosen outfit, feeling the absence of his knives, which he missed dearly. The idea of retrieving some sharp objects from the kitchen crossed his mind, and he decided to venture out. Deku left his room and made his way down the hallway to the kitchen. Finding it empty, he felt a sense of freedom. He began to search the fridge, discovering an array of healthy foods that surprised him. He gathered eggs, cheese, salt, pepper, milk, and bacon bits, then searched for pans while also keeping an eye out for a knife. Eventually, he found a pan and turned on the stove. As he prepared his meal, an unsettling feeling crept over him, as if someone was watching. He called out, suggesting that if anyone wanted to speak, they should reveal themselves. He found it amusing that they thought he was the villain. At that moment, he sensed the presence around him tense up, indicating they were unaware that he had noticed them. Shortly after, 6 individuals emerged from their hiding spots. Among them was a red-haired boy who had tried to assist Kaken, a blonde boy with a striking lightning bolt pattern in his hair, a small purple figure behind the kitchen island, a fully pink girl next to a brown-haired girl, and a blonde boy with an energetic demeanor also hiding behind the island. Deku remarked on their apparent boredom or fear, breaking the silence that followed. He questioned whether anyone would respond, intrigued by their sudden appearance. The atmosphere was thick with silence as the protagonist focused on cooking eggs, feeling the weight of the gazes from the others in the room. The tension was palpable, with the group shifting around, likely whispering among themselves. After finishing the meal, the protagonist attempted to break the ice by asking if anyone had questions or if they preferred to let their curiosity run wild. The silence persisted, prompting a frustrated remark about the need for someone to speak up. Finally, a girl with brown hair asked about the protagonist's quirk, recalling that Aizawa had mentioned a quirk cancellation ability. She expressed curiosity, especially since the protagonist had managed to take down Bakugo in one move without using a quirk. This question was familiar, as many people struggled to accept that a quirkless individual could be so strong and capable of defeating professional heroes. The protagonist explained that people often guess their quirk to be something like agility, but the truth was that they did not possess a quirk at all. A pink-haired girl sitting nearby pointed out that this was not what the news reported, and the protagonist confirmed that the rumors were incorrect. With a grin, they declared their quirklessness, which prompted an outburst from a boy with yellow hair, who vehemently denied the claim. The protagonist suggested that Bakugo could confirm their lack of a quirk, mentioning how Bakugo often referred to them as a quirkless nerd. At that moment, Bakugo entered the room, looking curious about the conversation. The protagonist explained that they were discussing their quirklessness and how Bakugo had frequently called them names in the past. They approached Bakugo, teasingly recalling the various insults he had hurled their way, including calling them a nerd and a loser. The class fell silent, enjoying the unfolding drama, and the protagonist reveled in the chaos they were creating. They continued to share anecdotes about Bakugo's bullying during their school years, which only drew more attention. Bakugo, clearly annoyed, attempted to silence the protagonist, but they persisted, relishing the moment. The tension in the room was electric, and the protagonist thrived on the feeling of stirring up trouble. As the scene shifted, the perspective changed to Kirishima, who reflected on the intensity of the situation. He recognized Bakugo's harshness but was taken aback by the severity of his words, suggesting that someone should harm themselves. Concerned, Kirishima observed Bakugo, who appeared unusually sad. This was a rare sight, as Bakugo was typically filled with anger. Kirishima approached Bakugo gently, offering to talk. Bakugo looked up, tears in his eyes, and nodded in response. Kirishima led him out of the room and down the hallway to his dorm, leaving the others in silence. As they exited, a villain's taunt echoed behind them, mocking Bakugo's vulnerability. Kirishima, wanting to shield his friend from further negativity, closed the door, determined to protect Bakugo from any additional hurt. Time passed as Kiri and Bakugo left the room to have a discussion. Deku found himself reflecting on the situation. He felt a mix of frustration and concern for Bakugo, who seemed unable to handle his own challenges. Deku thought about how the harsh realities of the world did not care for anyone's feelings, and he believed Bakugo needed to wake up to that truth. Having survived on the streets, Deku felt he had built a reputation for himself, while he doubted Bakugo would last a week in similar circumstances. Suddenly, Aizawa's scarf wrapped around Deku's mouth, arms, and legs, restraining him once again. Deku glared at the pro-hero, realizing that if he had continued yelling, he might have ended up causing serious trouble. Aizawa reminded him that it had not even been 24 hours since they arrived, and already he was causing conflicts. He urged Deku to learn self-control, which made Deku flinch at the mention of his name. Aizawa released him, allowing Deku to take a deep breath. From behind him, a girl spoke up, mentioning that Deku was quirkless. He turned to see a girl with frog-like features, which intrigued him. Aizawa remained expressionless, showing no signs of being affected by the conversation. He then asked Deku if it was true that he lacked a quirk. Deku smirked and responded ambiguously. Another student chimed in, pointing out that Bakugo had confirmed Deku's status, questioning the need for the cuff on his wrist. Aizawa explained that the cuff had more functions than just quirk cancellation, but left the conversation abruptly, as if nothing had happened. Deku felt bewildered by the dynamics of his new class. He grabbed some food from the kitchen and returned to his room, ignoring anyone who tried to engage him in conversation. He needed to devise a plan to escape the confines of the school quickly. The next morning marked the first day of classes. Deku awoke to the sound of an annoying alarm clock, feeling a surge of irritation. He rolled his eyes and began his morning routine, showering and getting ready for the day. He reluctantly donned the UA uniform, which he found unappealing. Checking the time, he realized he had some time before classes started, as they began at 7. Deku wondered which pro-hero would CRT him to class, as he was only allowed outside with supervision. Lost in thought, he glanced at the clock and noticed it was already 7. He decided to head to the commons area to wait. Upon entering, he found the room mostly empty except for 2 students, Denki Kaminari, who was hurriedly putting on his shoes, and Mina Ishido, who was waiting by the door for him. Mina, noticing Deku, expressed her concern about being late and the possibility of detention. Deku chuckled, knowing that he couldn't leave without a pro-hero. He mentioned his plan to skip class, which surprised her. With that, Kaminari and Ishido rushed out the door, eager to make it to class on time. Deku glanced at the clock again, realizing he needed the pro-hero to arrive soon if he wanted to avoid being late. Just then, All Might burst through the door, full of energy. Deku felt a wave of annoyance wash over him. All Might enthusiastically asked if Deku was ready for school, but Deku simply scowled and walked out the door, All Might following closely behind. All Might suggested a quicker way to get to UA, but Deku would have preferred to crawl than to speed there. He pointed out that they were late because All Might had shown up at the dorms late, which left All Might silent for the remainder of their walk. When Deku entered the classroom, all eyes turned to him. Aizawa commented on how he had not decided to skip class after all, likely due to the reports from Kaminari and Ishido. Deku decided to have a little fun with the situation, clarifying that he had been waiting for All Might because he wasn't allowed outside without supervision. Aizawa cut off Ishido when she tried to explain, stating he didn't care about the details and instructed Deku to take his seat. Deku complied, but not before addressing the class. He asked them to call him Deku instead of Midoriya, or even the Reaper if they preferred. Aizawa quickly told him to sit down, and the day continued. After a long day of classes, the students returned to the dorms. Deku planned to engage in a game with All Might while the hallway was filled with students heading outside. He blended into the crowd, following the flow of traffic as he considered his next move. In the corner of his vision, he noticed All Might heading towards the door of Class 1A, only to realize he was not waiting for him. Following the crowd, he made his way to the front gate. Just as he attempted to pass through, the school went into lockdown, sealing the gate immediately. Panic surged through him as he thought about the bracelet he was wearing, which he felt needed to be removed urgently. He scanned his surroundings for an escape route and spotted a tree in the distance. He sprinted toward it, but as he approached, dizziness and fatigue overwhelmed him. He thought about closing his eyes for just a moment, and before he knew it, he lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, he found himself in the nurse's office, restrained once again. Turning his head, he saw Aizawa, All Might, and Recovery Girl nearby. The door opened, and Nizu entered, greeting the group with a casual demeanor. His face clearly showed that he was aware of his predicament. Aizawa sighed, expressing his frustration about the trouble he seemed to attract. He noted that it was impossible for him to go a single day without causing issues. The response he expected from Aizawa was instead delivered by Nizu, who reminded him that the goal was to avoid trouble altogether. He retorted, pointing out the absurdity of allowing a known criminal into UA. Aizawa attempted to reason with him, emphasizing his potential and the longing of the staff to see him succeed. However, he felt defiant, insisting that if he had managed to get past the gate, he would have escaped and continued his life of crime, taking down heroes one by one. His villainous laughter filled the room, which seemed to unsettle those around him. Nizu exchanged glances with Aizawa, and as if communicating silently, the restraints were released. He was taken aback, realizing he had been unconscious long enough for the sun to rise, indicating he had been out for at least a day. Nizu cryptically questioned Aizawa about whether he truly wanted his student to undergo such experiences. Aizawa responded firmly, stating that if his students could not handle the challenges, they did not belong at UA. Later, he found himself in a conversation about a new task. He was confused when he was told he would play the role of a villain, tasked with hunting down hero students in a mock city while they attempted to capture him. The prospect excited him, especially when he learned he could use a special knife made by the support class, which, while lacking real blades, could still serve its purpose without causing serious harm. As the discussion continued, he learned about the condition of Endeavor, the pro-hero he had previously confronted. Endeavor was still recovering in the hospital, and the injuries he had inflicted were severe. Despite the gravity of the situation, he felt a sense of satisfaction knowing he had succeeded in his chaotic endeavor. When asked about his attire for the day, he opted for his villain outfit, feeling it was far more impressive than a gym uniform. After changing, he made his way to the commons area, where All Might awaited him. They walked together toward the main UA building, and after some time, they approached what appeared to be a closed-off city, leaving him to wonder about the school's resources. As they neared the rest of Class 1A, he felt a mix of anticipation and excitement for the challenges that lay ahead. Aizawa was explaining the task at hand when the group approached. He acknowledged All Might's arrival and indicated where Deku's knives were located. Deku nodded in response and walked over to the table, examining the assortment of knives laid out before him. The daggers had ordinary-looking handles, but the blades appeared almost glass-like, despite feeling like metal. When he tested one against his finger, it left a small red mark, resembling a freckle, but it didn't hurt. With a knife in hand, he plunged it into the table, noting that it penetrated just like a regular dagger. There were 9 knives in total, 5 throwing knives, 2 daggers, and 2 regular knives. All Might began explaining the rules of the exercise, emphasizing that the hero's objective was to capture the villain. They could do this by either using capture tape or knocking him unconscious. Deku's mission was to capture them or hit them with his knives. At the mention of his weapon, the class gasped. All Might reassured them that Deku's knives were not lethal, they would only leave a bruise or a red mark to indicate a hit. If someone received too many hits or a critical hit, they would be deemed immobilized and required to exit the arena. The stakes were high, as the last person standing would be exempt from homework for the following week. With the rules established, Deku was instructed to enter the arena, given a 15-minute head start before the aspiring heroes would enter. He decided not to venture too far into the city, opting instead to set up traps to separate the heroes. It was easier to take them down in one-on-one encounters rather than facing them as a group. Deku ducked behind a building, listening to the students as they searched for him. Anticipating their attempts to use capture tape, he knew he needed to act quickly. He climbed up to the rooftop, observing the heroes below as they shuffled around, trying to locate him. He stifled laughter as they turned corners, hoping to catch him off guard. Most were in groups, but a few had wandered off alone, which he considered a mistake. Scanning the area, he spotted a student with bird-like features in a back alley, isolated from the others. This would be his first target. He quickly descended and hid behind a garbage bin, planning to launch a surprise attack. As the bird hero walked past, he prepared to throw a knife at his back, ensuring he would not see it coming. However, the bird hero suddenly stopped and turned around, catching Deku off guard. Next to him was another creature, but there was no time for questions. As soon as their eyes met, Deku smirked and threw not one, but 2 throwing knives at them. While the bird hero dodged, he was too focused on avoiding the blades to notice Deku approaching from behind. With a swift motion, Deku stabbed him in the back, a hit that would have been fatal with real knives. The bird hero turned around, his expression a mix of shock and fear, which delighted Deku. He retrieved his throwing knives and moved on, noting that he had taken down one opponent. As he exited the alley, he locked eyes with Kaminari, who pointed him out to a girl with cords in her ears. Her eyes widened in recognition, and knowing they would pursue him, Deku dashed into another alleyway. He heard them yell that they had found him and quickly ducked behind a building, gripping his knife tightly. As soon as one of the heroes ran down the alley, he swung his knife, striking them in the throat. Upon looking to see who he had hit, he recognized Kaken. With a smirk and a wink, Deku ran off, having taken down another opponent. Despite feeling a bit rusty, he knew he needed to pick up the pace. Climbing another building for a better vantage point, he spotted someone with red and white hair standing on the rooftop. This hero had not noticed him yet, and as Deku prepared to throw a knife, the hero unexpectedly jumped off the building. Surprised, Deku rushed to the edge, expecting to see a body but instead found ice below. This must have been the hero's quirk, and he realized he needed to keep an eye on him, as it could pose a problem in the future. A chuckle escaped him as he reveled in the thrill of the chase, enjoying the moment as a villain. The protagonist had been honing their skills since childhood, focusing intently on the task at hand. As they scanned the ground, they managed to locate 15 of the 17 targets that remained. A strange sensation brushed against their left leg, indicating that the other two individuals who had been following them were nearby. Without hesitation, the protagonist reacted instinctively, delivering a kick to whoever had touched them. To their surprise, the kick had no effect. It felt as if they had struck a solid rock. The red-haired boy stood before them, attempting to bind them with capture tape. The protagonist quickly assessed their surroundings, realizing that there were no nearby buildings to jump to, and jumping down would likely result in serious injury or worse. Their blades seemed ineffective against the boy, but they considered that the knives they wielded only marked a person, which might offer a strategic advantage. Spinning the knife in their hand, the protagonist took up a fighting stance, remaining vigilant for the presence of the other unknown individual. The red-haired boy exuded confidence, but his expression betrayed a hint of fear. The protagonist noted this discrepancy and decided to exploit it. From the perspective of the red-haired boy, he felt a surge of anxiety as he faced the protagonist. He remained in his rock form, believing it would provide him with some protection. As he charged forward, the protagonist unexpectedly maneuvered behind him, causing him to feel a sudden impact on his back that shattered into pieces. The boy heard a quiet exclamation from his ally, indicating that things were not going as planned, which inadvertently worked to his advantage. The protagonist retrieved another knife from their outfit, now armed with one in each hand. The red-haired boy prepared his capture tape and charged again, but to his confusion, the protagonist ran away instead. The boy was baffled, realizing that they were on a rooftop. Suddenly, the protagonist leaped off the edge, prompting the red-haired boy to peer over, wondering if they possessed a quirk that allowed them to fly or bounce. To his astonishment, he saw the protagonist hanging from the wall of the adjacent building, their knives embedded in the surface. The boy marveled at the protagonist's skill. As the scene shifted, the protagonist felt a rush of exhilaration, realizing that their plan had worked. The bicolored-haired boy had inspired them, and they began to climb down the wall, glancing up to see the red-haired boy watching them. Although they could have taken him down, the protagonist decided it was wiser to escape rather than engage in a difficult fight. Once on the ground, the protagonist dashed into an alleyway, hearing footsteps behind them. Turning quickly, they spotted a large figure, one who had consumed sugar to enhance their strength. The protagonist acknowledged that they should learn the names of their opponents, but it hardly mattered at that moment. They needed to focus on the task at hand. Stopping to confront the large figure, the protagonist noted that he appeared fatigued. They prepared for battle, adopting a fighting stance while spinning their knives for intimidation. As the large figure charged, the protagonist smirked, knowing that heroes often made the first move. They executed a feint, stepping in one direction before darting in another, narrowly avoiding capture. In the close proximity, the protagonist managed to score a minor hit with their knife, but it was not enough to incapacitate the opponent. With Aizawa observing, the protagonists decided to put away their knives, eager to showcase their other skills. The large figure charged again, grabbing the protagonist's arm and attempting to spin them around. With a firm grip, he threw the protagonist against the wall, knocking the breath from their lungs. The protagonist feigned unconsciousness as the large figure approached, calling out to his teammates that he had captured them. Seizing the opportunity, the protagonist sprang back to life, retrieving a throwing knife and striking the large figure squarely in the back. With 3 opponents down and 16 remaining, the protagonist approached the group of heroes that had gathered. The large figure walked away in defeat as the protagonist greeted the others, which included a shy rock boy, a tail-wielding individual, and a short one with peculiar hair. Recognizing the need to act quickly, the protagonist launched 3 knives simultaneously. One grazed the short boy, another was blocked by the tail wielder, and the last struck the shy rock boy. The protagonist assessed the situation, identifying the tail wielder as the most significant threat. They assumed that the tail was the source of his quirk, while the short boy's abilities likely revolved around the unique features on his head. Drawing one of their daggers, the protagonist advanced slowly. The tail wielder stood his ground, while the short boy clearly showed signs of panic. The protagonist knew that displaying weakness would only embolden a villain. Transitioning from a walk to a full leap, they seized the short boy's arm, pressing a knife to his throat before letting him go. The short boy retreated, following the path taken by the shy rock boy. Now, only the tail wielder remained. After easily dispatching the other two, the protagonist could see the fear in his eyes. The situation was tense, as the protagonists found themselves facing a live villain whose sole purpose was to kill. Observing the villain's hero costume, it was clear that he possessed some knowledge of self-defense, employing those tactics in combat. The protagonists took a fighting stance, straightening their posture and gripping the last throwing knife they had. They noted that the villain had previously blocked a knife with his tail, which prompted the protagonist to throw the knife again. As the villain focused on stopping the blade, the protagonist seized the opportunity to run beside him and stab him in the back. After landing the blow, the protagonist began to walk away, but suddenly something fell on their head. It was a net. Looking around, they saw no one in sight. They quickly cut through the net, only to notice a piece of capture tape approaching. With a swift movement, the protagonist used the momentum from cutting the net to slice through the invisible assailant's stomach. The invisible girl, who was now revealed, expressed frustration at the failed ambush, but the protagonist sensed that she was not alone and inquired about her companions. The girl, despite her critical condition, responded with a defiant tone, refusing to divulge any information. The protagonist, undeterred, leaned closer to her and decided to ensure she understood the gravity of her situation by stabbing her again. In the midst of this, they kicked backward, hitting another opponent who had been lurking behind. This opponent, a girl with black hair, appeared disheveled but stood her ground, earning the protagonist's respect. Recognizing her underestimation of their observational skills, the protagonist took the initiative and charged at her, knives in hand, while she formed a pole weapon. As the girl swung at them, the protagonist dodged and complemented her skills, a tactic they found effective in disarming opponents. The girl, caught off guard, acknowledged the compliment, but it was evident she was fatigued. The protagonist seized the moment, catching her pole and pulling her close before delivering a decisive stab to her chest. With a smile, they acknowledged her effort before slipping away into the alley, noting that they had taken down 8 opponents, with 11 remaining. Meanwhile, another perspective emerged as Deku moved through the alleyway, eager to conclude the fights that had become monotonous. Spotting 3 aspiring heroes approaching, he recognized an opportunity. In front of him stood a girl with brown hair, a boy with blue hair, and a timid boy with spiky blonde hair hiding behind them. Sensing the fear emanating from the blonde boy, Deku decided to act quickly, throwing a knife that struck the boy squarely in the back. To his surprise, instead of collapsing, the boy doubled over in pain, raising alarms and drawing the attention of the other 2. Realizing they had some combat experience, Deku remained cautious. He darted behind the corner of a building, waiting for them to turn before launching an attack. To his astonishment, he managed to strike both of them, slashing through their torsos. While these wounds might not have been fatal in a normal fight, they were enough to incapacitate them, and he counted it as a victory. As he laughed at the ease of the encounter, he noticed the spiky-haired boy still on the ground and mockingly suggested that the others should comfort him before moving on. Scaling another building, Deku surveyed the area and counted 8 remaining opponents. He strategized, identifying the half-red-haired boy and the fully red-haired boy as his biggest threats, given their powerful quirks. However, as he recounted the opponents, he realized one was missing. Panic set in as he deduced that the half-and-half boy had vanished. Searching the rooftop for any sign of him, Deku began to hear the sound of an alarm, indicating that trouble was brewing. This might be the chance to escape. With the professionals occupied with the current situation, there was a possibility to break free. As he climbed back down the building, he noticed the professionals rounding up the students. Once he confirmed that no one was watching, he darted inside one of the nearby buildings. The interior was empty, and he hoped he would remain unnoticed. However, it wasn't long before Aizawa burst through the door, ensnaring him in his scarf. The plan had failed spectacularly, and he wondered how Aizawa had found him so easily. Aizawa's monotone voice reminded him that they could track him. Just as he processed this, Aizawa was suddenly knocked out. Confusion washed over him as he turned to see who had intervened. It was Toga, who had thrown a chair at Aizawa. He was baffled by her presence and questioned her motives, recalling that he thought the League of Villains had turned against him. Toga explained that while Shigaraki might not care for him, she still viewed him fondly and that the League needed him for a specific purpose. He was reluctant to accept her terms, realizing that she only needed him for a mission. Toga, however, was eager to leave, complaining about her legs hurting. He found her childish whining amusing but was also reminded of the cuff still attached to his wrist. If he kept it on, the heroes would track him, but if he removed it, the professionals would be alerted. Toga handed him 3 knives, real ones that glinted dangerously. As he ran his finger along the blade, a smile crept onto his face at the thought of taking down the heroes. He needed to remove the cuff, but his attempts with the knife were futile. Time was running out. The professionals would soon realize he was missing. He was lost in thought when Toga interrupted him, urging him to hurry. He realized he needed to get as far away from Aizawa as possible, knowing the hero could easily overpower both him and Toga. He noticed Toga lagging behind, her endurance not matching his own. He quickly offered her a piggyback ride, hoping to reach the League's headquarters where Shigaraki could help him with the cuff. As they reached a portal, he felt a weight lift from his back. However, Aizawa's capture scarf had grabbed Toga, and he knew the League would not take kindly to this turn of events. Inside the League's headquarters, he stood at the bar, feeling the urgency of the situation. He approached Shigaraki, demanding that he use his quirk to remove the cuff before the heroes discovered their location. Shigaraki complied, disintegrating the cuff, but the portal closed behind him, leaving Toga behind. Panic set in as he realized she was still captured. Twice, from a corner of the room, asked about Toga, and the atmosphere turned tense. He felt the weight of their gazes and knew he had to be cautious in how he explained the situation. He gripped his knives tightly, preparing for the worst. Just as he was about to speak, Kurojairi intervened, informing him that Toga had been captured by the heroes but that they could retrieve her if they had him out of their grasp. Relief washed over him. He had feared the worst. Kurojairi reassured him that he could relax his grip on the knives, as they needed his help with something. His curiosity piqued, he asked what they required and what he would gain from it. Kurojairi explained that the benefit for him was freedom from the heroes, but Shigaraki interrupted, revealing that they needed him to torture someone. Despite his initial hesitation, he agreed, provided they would leave him alone for a month in return. The deal was struck, but he was curious why they couldn't handle the task themselves. Shigaraki explained that the target had a strong will and was someone he knew personally, someone who might actually care about him. The mission was clear, they needed information on All Might, but the hostage was proving to be stubborn and uncooperative. Shigi felt a surge of frustration. The person being described bore a striking resemblance to Bakugo Katsuki, and it would be quite ironic if he were the one captured. The thought lingered in Shigi's mind, a mix of hope and dread. As the situation unfolded, Shigi smirked at his fellow villains, reveling in the power he held. He demanded to know where Bakugo was being kept. Kurojairi opened a portal, gesturing for Shigi to step through. Upon entering, he found himself in a dimly lit room where Bakugo was chained to the ground, forced to kneel. The quirk cancellation cuffs were a stark reminder of his helplessness. Bakugo looked up, his eyes reflecting a tumult of emotions: fear, sadness, and above all, rage. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and Shigi felt a thrill at the sight of his captive. The narrative shifted back in time to Toga's perspective. She was running at full speed, struggling to keep up with Deku, who was not only cute but surprisingly fast. As they fled, Deku urged her to hop onto his back, and she complied, grateful for the momentary relief. Just as they approached a portal that promised escape, Toga felt a constriction around her neck. Realizing that holding onto Deku would lead to their capture, she made the difficult decision to let go. Captured by the heroes, Toga found herself restrained in a chair within an interrogation room. All her knives had been confiscated, leaving her feeling powerless. The heroes seemed to think she posed a threat, but she had no intention of causing harm at that moment. A detective entered the room alongside the principal of UA High School and the teacher she had previously incapacitated. The principal, a bear-like figure, began asking her questions, but Toga was uninterested in cooperating. When presented with a choice between jail and a rehabilitation program, Toga quickly opted for jail, eager to meet new friends. The principal explained that if she participated in the program and continued to exhibit villainous tendencies, she would eventually end up in jail anyway. Reluctantly, Toga agreed to the program, though she made it clear that she would not be happy about it. Meanwhile, Bakugo regained consciousness, his head pounding. He realized he had been knocked out and was now chained to the floor, unable to use his quirk. As he scanned the room, he noticed a familiar face, Deku. The years had changed them both, but the darkness in Deku's eyes was unmistakable. Bakugo felt a mix of anger and confusion. They had both been shaped by their experiences, but in vastly different ways. Deku locked eyes with Bakugo, taunting him with a reminder of their past. Bakugo's shame was evident as he looked away, but Deku was determined to extract information about All Might. He approached Bakugo, knife in hand, and lifted his chin to force eye contact. The tension escalated as Bakugo attempted to fight back, but Deku was quick, slicing his cheek in the process. The confrontation was charged with animosity, as Deku mocked Bakugo's attempts to assert himself. He was relentless, revealing the bully beneath Bakugo's bravado. As Deku prepared to continue his interrogation, the stakes were high, and the outcome uncertain. As he cut off his shirt, he ran his fingers across Kaken's bare back. With a knife in hand, he began to carve the letter B into Kaken's skin. Kaken struggled to suppress his screams, which was understandable given the pain of having a letter etched into his flesh. He asked Kaken if he had any information about All Might or if he would need to continue carving. Kaken, in his usual aggressive tone, refused to say anything to a villain. He expressed disappointment, stating that he really did not want to inflict more pain but felt he had no choice. He added the letters U, and by this point, Kaken was losing a significant amount of blood. Typically, someone in such agony would be too overwhelmed to remain conscious, but Kaken held on to his pride, which was almost pitiful. He carved the final letter, Y, completing the word bully, a fitting label for Kaken. Noticing a tear roll down Kaken's face, he taunted him, suggesting that it was surprising to see the tough Kaken show vulnerability. Kaken attempted to respond, but his words were muffled. He urged Kaken to speak up, calling him weak. Kaken shouted in anger, expressing his frustration. He remarked that he had tried to inflict pain, but causing suffering was far more enjoyable than experiencing it himself. With that, he left the room. Meanwhile, Kaken found himself in a cell, feeling as if his back were on fire. He could barely move due to the restraints. The room was entirely made of cement, lacking a door and featuring only a small window high up near the ceiling. There was a bed in one corner and a toilet, but the window was too small for escape. He heard someone enter the cell. It was the warp gate user. The individual silently unlocked the chains but left the quirk cancellation cuff on before departing. Still kneeling, Kaken braced himself for the pain of movement and slowly made his way to the bed. He planned to attack the next person who entered the room. He had observed that it took a few seconds for someone to pass through the portal, giving him a chance to strike. Although they might have weapons, they would be ineffective against an unconscious opponent. He noted the absence of cameras in the room, believing that the villains would not realize a member had been incapacitated until he emerged from the portal instead. Exhausted from the pain, Kaken eventually fell asleep on his stomach. Deku returned to Kaken's cell, bringing food and finding him passed out on the bed. He placed the food next to the wall and approached the sleeping figure. Kaken lay face down, exposing his back to the air. Deku applied some healing ointment to the fresh cuts he had inflicted, hoping to prevent infection. He understood that he could not allow Kaken to die, as that would mean losing valuable information. Deku knew that Shigaraki had assigned him this task because Kaken recognized him, but he believed that this familiarity was also why Kaken would not break. Kaken was determined not to appear weak, especially in front of someone he knew. After leaving the food in the room, Deku hoped Kaken would eat it upon waking. If Kaken died without revealing anything, Deku knew he would face dire consequences. As he stepped through the portal, he found himself back in his old apartment. The familiar surroundings reminded him that the heroes would likely search for him there soon, prompting him to consider finding a new place to stay. He contemplated picking a lock to sleep in an abandoned building, knowing it would be uncomfortable but functional. Suddenly, a sweet scent filled the apartment, accompanied by a purple fog. He began to feel drowsy, and before he realized it, he had fallen asleep. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in his dorm room at UA. Realizing that the heroes had caught him once more, he cursed Kurogiri for sending the portal to his apartment. There was nothing he could do about it now. He got up from the bed and approached the door, only to find it locked. After sitting back down, he checked for any knives, but they had all been confiscated again. About 10 minutes later, he heard a knock on the door. When he responded, he was met with Aizawa's voice asking for permission to enter. Aizawa opened the door and informed him that he had escaped only to be recaptured. He explained that Nizu had intervened with the authorities, preventing Kaken from being sent to a maximum security prison at such a young age. Aizawa mentioned that Kaken had been given another chance to redeem himself. There was a brief pause before Deku asked if there was anything else Aizawa wanted to discuss. Aizawa inquired about Kaken's whereabouts, suggesting that they believed Deku's escape was linked to Kaken's kidnapping. He also mentioned that Toga was in Class 1B and was adapting well to the students, unlike when she first arrived. Deku noted that Aizawa still seemed upset about the situation with Kaken. The truth was that the character did not know where Kaken was, but he was aware that Kaken was in the hands of the League. He had not planned his escape, it was all orchestrated by the League, which had never truly mattered to him. He had only sought them out for jobs. As he pondered the situation, he realized he needed to vent, and the person he was speaking to seemed like a suitable outlet. He wondered about the status of their classes and learned that while he would still attend, he and Toga would be required to take an additional class focused on the negative aspects of villainy. The idea of an extra class made him feel a mix of emotions, and he found the concept of being labeled as heroic to be distasteful. After some time, he left his room in search of food, having not eaten since the previous day. As he walked down the hall, he encountered some aspiring heroes who regarded him with suspicion. He grabbed a bag of chips and turned to face them, only to be immediately confronted by a red-haired boy who demanded to know what he had done with Bakugo. This inquiry amused him, as it revealed the boy's concern for his friend. He smirked at the boy's distress and taunted him with various possibilities of what could have happened to Kaken, relishing the reaction it provoked. Just then, he received a sharp slap to the face, which only widened his smile. He acknowledged that he deserved it and proceeded to share a dark secret about Kaken, leaning in close to emphasize his words. The boy stood frozen, likely grappling with the implications of what he had just heard. A pink-haired girl rushed to check on the boy, while he casually moved to the couch to watch the news, eager to catch up on recent events. He learned that there were reports of anti-UA graffiti around town, which he found amusing from a villain's perspective. The irony of a school designed to train heroes being portrayed as the villains was not lost on him. After a few moments, a brown-haired girl sat beside him, seemingly unfazed by his presence as a villain. He considered the possibility of swaying her to their side, intrigued by the challenge it might present. As time passed, he reflected on the situation and the dynamics at play. Meanwhile, Bakugo, who had been confined for a day and a half, felt the absence of the nerd who had not been around since his capture. He suspected that the nerd was enjoying himself while he remained trapped. Although his back was healing slightly, movement still caused him significant pain. One morning, he discovered food left near the wall, and the thought of it made his stomach rumble. After eating, a portal opened, presenting an opportunity for escape. He positioned himself by the portal and as someone stepped through, he swung at them, knocking the person to the ground. Upon realizing he had knocked out Kirishima, he was taken aback, wondering why Kirishima was there and if he had come to rescue him. The mission had gone horribly wrong, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on him. He felt a surge of panic as he tried to wake his friend, shaking him gently until he finally stirred, looking drowsy and nauseous. When their eyes met, a spark of recognition lit up his friend's face, and he leaped forward, embracing him tightly. The sudden impact caused a wince of pain, but his friend quickly noticed and expressed concern. He grasped his friend's shoulders, asking about his well-being. Although he assured him he was fine, he turned to reveal the carved letters on his back. The atmosphere shifted, becoming tense and heavy as his friend's expression darkened upon seeing the marks. The question that followed was laced with concern, and he confirmed that it was indeed Deku who had done this to him, adding that he suspected more was planned. His friend, Kiri, reassured him that Deku was back at UA, explaining how he had managed to find him. Kiri's smile returned as he recounted the details of his search, mentioning that he had confronted Deku after learning about the attack. The mention of having slapped Deku brought a sense of satisfaction, and he agreed that the nerd had deserved it. Curiosity piqued, he inquired how Kiri had tracked him down. As Kiri explained, they moved to sit on the bed together. He detailed how Deku had informed him that the League had him, prompting Kiri to seek out Toga from Class 1B. Despite her creepy demeanor, he had bravely asked her about the League's hideout. Although she hadn't provided specific information, she had suggested a certain alleyway where he might encounter a League member. Kiri had asked Momo to create a tracker that he could ingest, ensuring he could be located even if captured. He recounted how he had followed an alligator-like figure to the villain's hideout, managing to resist their attempts to subdue him until they finally placed a quirk cancellation cuff on him. After waking up in a bar, he had been directed through a portal to see his friend, only to be knocked out upon arrival. The realization that they were being tracked by Momo filled him with hope. He expressed his anticipation of being rescued soon. And Kiri confirmed that was indeed the plan. The thought of the villains being taken down excited him, and he couldn't help but imagine the confrontation. Meanwhile, at UA, Deku sat on the couch in the common area, surrounded by the rest of Class 1A. Aizawa entered, and the students eagerly shared their plan to rescue Bakugo. Aizawa questioned the feasibility of their approach, pointing out the dangers of storming the villain's base. The students believed they had a solid lead, having tracked Bakugo's movements to a bar that was suspected to be the League's main hideout. Kiri had gone missing after a brief detour, and they were hopeful he was still safe. Aizawa raised concerns about the possibility of the tracker being discovered, but the students reassured him that Kiri had ingested it, making it undetectable. The situation felt increasingly precarious, and Deku couldn't shake the fear that if they found Bakugo, he might reveal secrets that could endanger them all. He couldn't resist teasing the group, suggesting dark possibilities about Bakugo's fate, which seemed to unsettle them. He enjoyed watching their reactions, knowing that the thought of betrayal or loss weighed heavily on their minds. One of the girls spoke passionately about their commitment to rescue their friends, emphasizing Bakugo's hidden kindness despite his tough exterior. Deku reminded them that Bakugo was still a bully, and if they found him, they would understand the full extent of his actions. With a cryptic remark about the uncertainty of their mission, he excused himself and retreated to his room, relishing the last word and the tension it created. As he sat alone, he reflected on the foolishness of their mission. The heroes believed they could defeat the League, but he knew the stakes were higher than they realized. The atmosphere in the room was tense as the protagonist reflected on the situation. They had never been a fan of the League, only seeking work that paid well for their skills. The mission at hand was impressive, and they acknowledged the bond shared among the members, reminiscent of a family. However, the protagonist believed that emotional connections would only serve as liabilities in their line of work. A sudden knock on the door interrupted their thoughts. The protagonist called out, demanding to know what was wanted. Upon opening the door, they found Kaminari, Siro, and Ashido standing there, looking somewhat anxious. Reluctantly, the protagonist allowed them to enter. Inside the dimly lit room, an awkward silence enveloped them as the door closed. Kaminari whispered to his friends, expressing his unease about the situation. The protagonist, with a chilling demeanor, acknowledged their reputation as a villain and the ominous atmosphere they created. As the lights flickered on, the brightness momentarily blinded Kaminari and his friends. They adjusted their eyes to see the protagonist casually sitting on the bed, revealing a starkly decorated room that suggested a lack of personal touch, likely due to the constraints imposed by professional heroes. Kaminari, still processing the earlier revelation, inquired about the protagonist's earlier comment regarding their ability to harm them. The protagonist nonchalantly stated that they could have killed them 23 times, a number that struck Kaminari as excessive. After a brief moment, the purpose of their visit returned to the forefront of their minds. Kaminari hastily explained that they needed help retrieving Bakugo and Kirishima. The protagonist's response was slow and deliberate, emphasizing their role in Kirishima's kidnapping and the torture he had endured. The mention of their plans for further harm was abruptly halted by Shiro, who interjected, urging the protagonist to stop. Mina, curious about the protagonist's tone regarding the League, noted the underlying disdain in their voice. The protagonist reflected on their tumultuous relationship with the League, expressing frustration over Shigaraki's childishness and pettiness. They had sought employment with the League for financial gain but secretly wished to see them fall. Kaminari seized the moment, suggesting that if the protagonist wanted to see the League dismantled, they could assist in the effort to rescue their friends. The protagonist appeared to contemplate this proposal, recognizing the potential for collaboration. If they could infiltrate the League's headquarters, they could create a diversion while the others executed their plan. Curiosity piqued, the protagonist asked what they would gain from this alliance. Kaminari, caught off guard by the question, turned to Mina for guidance. Mina reminded them of Aizawa's instructions for such situations, prompting Kaminari to recall the offer of a day off from extra classes, along with a bag of chips as an incentive. Mina produced the bag of chips and tossed it to the protagonist, who caught it effortlessly, showcasing their remarkable abilities. The protagonist countered with a request for 3 days off, leading to a playful negotiation that ended with a compromise of 2 days and a second bag of chips. As Mina searched for the second bag, the protagonist revealed that they had taken it, along with her watch and wallet, during their earlier encounter. They returned the items, keeping a small amount of money for themselves, and then stood up to leave the room. The protagonist's departure left Kaminari and his friends puzzled, questioning why someone would leave their own room. Despite the oddity of the situation, they felt a surge of confidence about the mission ahead. With the protagonist on their side, they believed they could successfully execute their plan. The anticipation of what lay ahead filled the air, and they were determined to see it through. Denki's voice echoed through the dorms, announcing that someone had agreed to join their mission. Aizawa stood alongside All Might and Nizu, discussing the details of their rescue operation. Nizu turned to the students rushing toward them, pleased that their plan was coming together. He addressed Aizawa, inquiring if he would inform the new recruit about their role in the mission. Aizawa, with his characteristic fatigue, acknowledged that he would. Aizawa walked down the hall toward Deku's room. After creating a dramatic exit from the presence of the heroes, Deku returned to his space, only to hear a knock at the door. Before he could respond, Aizawa's voice came through, asking for permission to enter and share the mission details. Deku welcomed him inside. The weary teacher entered, and Deku immediately sought clarity on the plan. He needed a strategy, especially when dealing with the League of Villains. Aizawa explained that Deku would be equipped with a bug and a tracker. When Deku interrupted to ask if his cuff would be removed, Aizawa confirmed that it would be taken off, but requested to continue his explanation. Aizawa detailed that Deku would be tracked to ensure he did not attempt to escape. He emphasized the importance of acting normally upon entering the League space, as they would not suspect anything unusual if he behaved as he usually did. Aizawa noted that Deku's previous interactions with the League had not been friendly, and they likely held resentment toward him for not providing useful information about All Might. Aizawa then asked if it was true that Deku had been involved in torturing Bakugo, which he confirmed. He explained that the League had needed someone close to Bakugo to extract information, and now that they had Kirishima, they were likely using him to apply pressure on Bakugo. Aizawa listened intently, his expression revealing concern for his students. The plan required Deku to request access to Bakugo's cell under the pretense of gathering more information. This would allow him to enter without raising suspicion. By the time he reached the cell, he would inform the League that Bakugo had escaped, ensuring that the villains were distracted and that no one else was present during the rescue. Aizawa sought confirmation that Deku understood the plan, to which Deku affirmed that he did. Deku mentioned that he typically visited the League around 9 in the evening, though there was no strict schedule. He went whenever he needed money or sought to engage in villainous activities. He expressed the need to stop by his apartment for supplies, including knives, and noted that he couldn't appear too clean or heroic. Aizawa explained the parameters set by the police regarding his return to villainy. Deku would be allowed to stay at his apartment for a week, monitored from a distance with cameras installed. He could only leave for specific reasons and would be followed by a hero in disguise. Aizawa cautioned him to avoid any lethal confrontations with local villains, emphasizing the importance of staying out of trouble. Deku felt a sense of excitement at the prospect of returning to his former life, albeit with restrictions. He agreed to the terms, and as Aizawa prepared to leave, he advised Deku to start packing for his week away. With that, Aizawa exited the room, leaving Deku with a sense of anticipation for the days ahead. Deku quickly gathered his scorched villain outfit, the only thing he had left since his capture. He met up with Aizawa, who attached the tracking device and a taser to him, ensuring that he could be incapacitated if necessary. Once he donned his villain attire and the cuff was removed, he felt a sense of relief as he rolled his wrist, finally free from the irritating device. With a nod of acknowledgement, he stepped out into the world, this time without a pro-hero at his side, but rather with one discreetly following him. After walking for about 30 minutes, he noticed some petty criminals lurking in the back alleys, likely shocking the hero, tailing him with the number of unsavory characters on the streets. Suddenly, a scream caught his attention. A girl was chasing after a thief who had snatched her purse. As the thief ran toward him, he collided with Deku, failing to recognize who he had bumped into. In response, Deku tripped him, believing that such behavior deserved a lesson. If he had his knives, he might have inflicted a non-lethal wound to assert demps in the streets. As the thief fell, Deku walked away, hearing the girl use pepper spray on him as she reclaimed her belongings. This encounter was just another typical day on the streets, filled with the chaos and unpredictability that defined his life. The hero following closely behind must have been enduring a great deal of suffering due to the rampant crime in the area. However, they had to maintain their cover, which made it all the more frustrating. The chosen path was one filled with crime, a deliberate choice made to witness the hero's struggle. The professionals were well aware of the criminal activities in these streets, yet they often chose to ignore them, likely believing that if they didn't see it, it wasn't happening. It was doubtful that they would start paying attention now. Eventually, the protagonist arrived at their apartment. Upon opening the door, it was evident that things were out of order. Someone had likely broken in, attempting to steal valuable items. Fortunately, the police had already raided the place, and at least they had returned everything to its original position. The apartment was modest, consisting of 2 rooms and a bathroom, with a combined kitchen and living area. As the protagonist surveyed the space, they noticed the cameras discreetly placed around the apartment. After changing into a hoodie and jeans, the protagonist decided it was time to venture out for food, realizing that the fridge likely contained little that was still edible. Even before being captured, a restock had been necessary. Meanwhile, Bakugo had been in captivity for over a day alongside Kirishima. No one had visited them, leading Bakugo to wonder if the villains were unaware that Kirishima had also been captured. Just as these thoughts crossed his mind, a portal opened and a villain emerged, causing Bakugo to tense up, masking his fear with anger. The last encounter with a villain had left him with a scar on his back, a painful reminder of their brutality. The villain, with tangled blue hair and a hand covering his face, approached Kirishima, who was visibly on edge. Bakugo instinctively took a fighting stance, but he quickly realized that any action could jeopardize Kirishima's safety. The villain, known for orchestrating their capture, threatened Kirishima, making it clear that one wrong move could result in dire consequences. Bakugo felt a surge of rage, blaming himself for Kirishima's predicament. If he hadn't been so weak, they wouldn't be in this situation. When the villain demanded information about All Might, Bakugo hesitated but knew he had to protect his friend. He reluctantly agreed to answer the questions, hoping to buy them some time. As he fabricated answers, he mentioned a supposed peanut allergy of All Might's, recalling a casual conversation from lunch. Kirishima caught on to the ruse and played along, which seemed to frustrate the villain. Ultimately, the villain released Kirishima and left, allowing them a moment of relief. Kirishima rubbed his neck, still feeling the tight grip from the villain, and expressed his fear, but Bakugo reassured him that they would find a way out soon. In another part of the city, Deku had been staying at his old apartment for the past week. At night, he wandered through back alleys, observing fights. One night, a pro-hero had appeared, and he found it ironic that he had been chased but managed to escape, knowing he could have caused harm if not for the watchful eyes around him. Avoiding capture had become easier, as the lesser-known heroes seemed almost laughable. However, the day had come for him to betray the League. He felt conflicted. While he despised the League, he held an even greater disdain for the heroes. His plan was to convince them that he had turned over a new leaf, believing that if he could portray himself as no longer a villain, they would let him go. As he prepared to head to the League's headquarters, he donned a spare villain outfit, one that was typically reserved for when his main attire required cleaning or repairs. Just before leaving, a disguised pro-hero arrived at his door, handing him knives. He took them, feeling the sharpness as he accidentally pricked his finger, drawing blood. Walking towards the League's headquarters, he mentally reviewed his plan. Upon entering, he spotted familiar faces: Kurogiri behind the bar, Shigaraki seated on a stool, and Dabi in the back, engaged in a card game with Compress. It was evident they were cheating, but he paid little attention to their antics. Instead, he noticed that the television, usually broadcasting the news, was displaying a live feed from a cell, which could complicate matters. Shigaraki's scratchy voice broke through his thoughts, questioning his whereabouts. Deku responded, claiming he had been keeping a low profile, knowing that the next steps would determine his fate. After leaving UA, the protagonist felt an increased sense of danger, as if everyone was now targeting them more than ever. They had successfully convinced their companions of their reasoning, and curiosity about a new student had piqued their interest. Kurogiri explained that the newcomer had practically begged to see Bakugo, and they had used this opportunity to extract information. A smirk formed on the protagonist's face at the thought of the intelligence they could gain. Shigi interjected with a surprising piece of information: All Might had an allergy to peanuts. The protagonist's interest was further piqued, and they expressed a longing to extract more information from Bakugo, even relishing the thought of seeing him distressed over his friend's predicament. Shigi agreed, cautioning them not to kill anyone just yet, but promising that they would have the go-ahead when the time was right. The protagonist felt a surge of possessiveness, asserting that they wanted to be the one to take down Bakugo, while the others could do as they pleased with the rest. They reminded themselves to be cautious about their words, aware that heroes might be listening. With their mission clear, they prepared to enter the cell, intending to deliver the news of their friend's fate and escape before the League or the heroes could retaliate. As the portal opened, the protagonist stepped through, expecting an empty cell but instead finding Bakugo and Kirishima inside. Bakugo instinctively jumped back, remembering their previous encounter. He positioned himself protectively in front of Kirishima, determined not to let the villain approach his friend. The protagonist noticed a camera aimed at the cell, realizing there was no way to hide their actions. To maintain the facade, they taunted Bakugo, mocking his protective instincts while dismissing him as pathetic. Kirishima appeared shocked, realizing the protagonist was out of UA again and fully embracing their villainous role. The protagonist addressed the camera, asking if assistance was available, and received a static response from Kurogiri. Moments later, Kirishima collapsed, followed by Bakugo, both incapacitated. The protagonist secured Bakugo and Kirishima to the ground, ready to torture them for information. As they waited for their captives to regain consciousness, they reflected on the mission's purpose and the absence of any rescuers. Doubts crept in about whether something had gone wrong with the plan. Soon, they noticed the two stirring, and it was time to begin. Approaching the pair with a knife in hand, the protagonist could see the realization dawn on Bakugo, who understood the impending pain. Kirishima, initially oblivious, quickly grasped the situation when he saw Bakugo's attempt to mask his fear. The protagonist stood before them, knife poised, and pressed it against Bakugo's neck, eliciting a worried reaction from Kirishima. The protagonist relished the moment, knowing that this would hurt Kirishima more than Bakugo, whom they had long wished to see suffer. As they pressed the blade into Bakugo's skin, drawing a small amount of blood, Bakugo tensed, likely anticipating the torment to come. The protagonist was careful not to inflict too much damage, stalling for time until the heroes arrived. Kirishima, noticing Bakugo's injury, pleaded for the protagonist to stop, offering to do anything they asked in exchange for Bakugo's safety. The protagonist reveled in the moment, recalling the years of pain Bakugo had caused them. Kirishima's desperate plea for peace only fueled the protagonist's anger, and they questioned what Kirishima would do in a real-life situation without his quirks. The tension escalated as the protagonist's frustration boiled over. Just then, Kirishima interrupted their thoughts, pointing out a noise above them. The protagonist heard it too, a banging sound that quickly escalated into chaos as the ceiling collapsed. With the ceiling crashing down, the protagonist braced for the unexpected arrival of heroes and UA students, realizing that the element of surprise had shifted dramatically. The wood hero charged at them, and the situation was about to take a turn they hadn't anticipated. The protagonist needed to prove to the League that they were a villain, but they were cautious not to cause too much damage, knowing that the heroes could easily incapacitate them with the devices they used. They adjusted their knives, gripping one in each hand, ready for the confrontation ahead. As wood debris flew toward them, they skillfully used their knife to slice through it, ensuring they maintained the upper hand. If they found themselves in trouble, they could always claim they were merely ensuring the League wouldn't catch on to their true intentions. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed a hero attempting to sneak up from behind. Acting on instinct, they swung their knife but pulled back just enough to avoid serious harm, allowing the blade to graze the hero instead. Turning to see who it was, they recognized the brown-haired girl from the dorms. Deciding to give her an opportunity to take them down, they thought it would be amusing to let her succeed, especially since they would eventually have to return to the dorms. It felt like a small victory over the professionals who had failed to capture them. The girl took advantage of the opening, placing her hand on the protagonist's chest. In that moment, they felt a strange lightness, as if they were no longer grounded. It dawned on them that this was her quirk. They recalled her participation in the sports festival against Kaken and how they had avoided watching it, not wanting to see Kaken overpower anyone and be rewarded for it. Floating in the air was a new experience for the protagonist, who had only known free-fall fights before, which were always nerve-wracking due to their time constraints. Just as they were lost in thought, they noticed the wood hero's attack coming toward them again. They quickly cut through the wood, but then felt something wrap around them, signaling the end of their fun. Aizawa had arrived, using his scarf to restrain them. He nodded at the girl, whose name they now remembered was Uraraka, signaling her to set them down. As they began to descend, the protagonist braced for impact. Although they weren't too high off the ground, they worried about landing awkwardly and potentially injuring themselves. Just before hitting the ground, Uraraka touched their shoulder, allowing them to float momentarily before gently lowering them to the ground. They glanced over at Aizawa, who always seemed perpetually tired. With limited mobility, they approached him and casually inquired about his well-being. Aizawa responded with a sigh, expressing surprise that the protagonist hadn't harmed anyone during the encounter. They reflected on how easily they could have inflicted serious injuries if they had truly intended to. As they walked through the remnants of the building, the protagonist searched for familiar landmarks but only saw trees surrounding them. Aizawa led them down a narrow trail until they reached a grassy area with several parked cars. He mentioned that he trusted them not to cause any trouble as someone opened a car door for them. Understanding the hint, they climbed into the back seat while Aizawa took the driver's seat and Present Mike settled in the passenger seat. The combination of personalities in the car was unusual, with Aizawa's serious demeanor contrasting sharply with Present Mike's exuberance. As they drove, Present Mike blasted music that seemed aimed at a much younger audience, which eventually pushed Aizawa to unplug his phone from the AUX cord and toss it out the window without a word. The protagonist couldn't help but feel impressed by Aizawa's decisive action. The car ride continued in an awkward silence until they arrived near the Heights Alliance building. They walked the remaining distance, with Present Mike's loud commentary giving the protagonist a headache by the time they entered the common area. A swarm of anxious classmates greeted them, all eager to learn what had transpired during the past week. The protagonist noted the stares directed at them, feeling slightly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. When one classmate asked if they had rescued Kiri and Bakugo, the protagonist considered playing a prank to ease the tension. They began to respond with a dark joke about the fate of their classmates but was interrupted by Aizawa, who firmly stated that they had indeed brought them back. He explained that Bakugo had sustained the most injuries but would heal, while Uraraka had a few scrapes, and Kirishima was physically unharmed. Feeling the weight of their classmates' curiosity, the protagonist began to retreat to the back of the room, knowing they were the cause of the injuries being discussed. Meanwhile, Momo expressed concern about Uraraka's condition, while Kaminari remarked on how fortunate it was that only work-study students had participated in the encounter. As the protagonist observed Deku hiding in the corner, they became curious about how the heroes had sustained their injuries and decided to ask him, knowing he had been with the villains during that time. Aizawa acknowledged Deku with a nod, signaling him to be honest. Deku admitted to possibly being responsible for the chaos that had occurred earlier. The atmosphere in the room became tense and silent as everyone processed the gravity of his admission. This 15-year-old, just like many of his peers, had the capability to inflict harm without a hint of remorse, which raised serious concerns about his well-being. After the earlier incident where he had been confronted about his actions, Deku retreated to the solitude of his room. Hours passed, and he began to hear commotion in the hallway, piquing his curiosity. He stepped out to find Kaken, Kirishima, Uraraka, and Tsu surrounded by other students, all buzzing with questions about the earlier events. Most inquiries were directed at Kaken, who seemed to be the focal point of their concern. Deku leaned against the wall, waiting for someone to notice him, particularly Kaken. Eventually, their eyes met, and Kaken's expression turned to one of anger. He called out to Deku, demanding to know why he had been with the villains. The intensity of Kaken's rage was almost amusing to Deku. He casually explained that the heroes had instructed him to act that way, which only fueled Kaken's fury. Kaken shouted, incredulous at the suggestion that the heroes would condone such actions. Deku, leaning in closer, took full responsibility for his actions, revealing that he had been monitored and prevented from causing more harm. He hinted that if he hadn't been tracked, he could have inflicted far worse damage on Kaken's friend, leaving Kaken to suffer alone. Deku noticed Kaken trembling slightly, a detail that would have gone unnoticed from a distance. Deciding to leave Kaken behind, Deku approached the group of students observing the confrontation. As he moved through the crowd, a path opened for him, and he made his way to Uraraka. He expressed his regret for having hurt her, explaining that he needed to maintain his cover with the villains and that he held no sympathy for Kaken. Uraraka appeared shaken but managed to keep her composure, a feat that Deku found impressive given the circumstances. She reassured him that she had healed and was not dead, which was a relief to her. Despite the tension, she did not seem angry, leaving Deku puzzled about her reaction. He wondered how she could remain so calm after being harmed. Uraraka, noticing his confusion, prompted him to clarify his thoughts. Realizing he had been staring at her in bewilderment, Deku awkwardly commented on her heroic demeanor, which elicited a small smile from her. She insisted that if she chose to interpret his words as a compliment, then they were indeed a compliment. Deku found her cheerful disposition perplexing, especially in light of their recent encounter. Feeling overwhelmed by the positive energy in the room, he retreated back to his room. After some time spent alone, he heard a knock at his door. Kaminari's voice called out, inviting him to join a gaming session with him, Siro, and Mina. Though he had little experience with video games, he decided to join them, thinking it would be simple. As time passed, Deku found himself repeatedly defeated in the games they played. He was surprised by the skill required to compete effectively, feeling frustrated that the heroes were better than him at something so trivial. His focus had always been on training for combat and survival, not on gaming, and he had never had the funds to invest in video games. Reflecting on his past, he recalled that while he had once held a high bounty as a villain, no one had succeeded in taking him down, until a hero had managed to outsmart him. He realized he had a villain class scheduled for the following day after his regular classes, which he was dreading. Although he had 2 days off, he still felt apprehensive about the upcoming session, especially since he would be in class with Toga, who had a reputation for unpredictability. The thought of her potential antics made him uneasy, but he reminded himself that she, like him, did not have access to weapons at that moment. The atmosphere was tense as the protagonist entered the room. Not only was Toga present, but a group of other young criminals lingered nearby. The sight of them sparked curiosity among the onlookers, especially given the protagonist's notorious reputation. Many of the faces were familiar, having crossed paths on the streets before. As the protagonist scanned the room, Toga's voice broke through the chatter, calling out excitedly. Despite the challenges of adjusting from a life of villainy to the constraints of the hero world, Toga expressed her contentment, claiming to have made many friends. However, her enthusiasm took a dark turn as she mentioned her intentions to harm those friends once she was free, revealing the familiar unpredictability that characterized her. The protagonist couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement and concern at Toga's words. It was clear that the heroes had reason to worry, especially with someone like Toga around. For now, the protagonist felt a sense of relief that Toga had not turned her attention toward them. In another part of the classroom, a fellow student observed the dynamics at play. This student noted that most of the attendees were minor criminals, caught for petty crimes rather than anything more severe. Toga was the exception, her reputation preceding her. Whispers about her bizarre habits circulated, including tales of her consuming hearts and her unusual tolerance for energy drinks. The door creaked open, and the student turned to see a familiar figure enter, the Reaper. The rumors had been true, he was indeed present. The Reaper appeared younger than expected, his demeanor suggesting disinterest in the proceedings. As he exchanged glances with Toga, it was evident that they shared a camaraderie that left the student feeling isolated. Moments later, the teacher entered, and the atmosphere shifted. All Might, the legendary hero, stood before them. The Reaper's exasperation echoed the student's own thoughts, and a quiet snicker escaped the student's lips. All Might's presence was imposing, yet there was a hint of vulnerability that the villains sensed, an opportunity to exploit. As the class progressed, the protagonists found themselves distracted by Toga's incessant poking with a pencil. When All Might directed a question toward them, the protagonists scrambled to respond, caught off guard. The options presented were straightforward, yet the protagonist decided to take a risk, offering a sarcastic answer that drew the attention of the entire class. Aizawa, another instructor, quickly interjected, correcting the protagonist's response and emphasizing the importance of helping others. The protagonist felt a surge of frustration. They were determined to maintain their reputation as a formidable presence among their peers. To assert their demps, they casually inquired about Endeavor, relishing the discomfort that followed. The revelation that Endeavor was still hospitalized stirred a mix of reactions in the room. The protagonists took pride in their accomplishment, having taken down the number 2 hero, and now set their sights on the top hero. Toga's interjection reminded the protagonist of their recent arrest, but they brushed it off, confident in their abilities. As the lesson continued, the protagonists settled into their seat, aware of the eyes upon them. The other students were wary, quickly averting their gazes when met with the protagonist's stare. It was a familiar dance of power and intimidation, and the protagonist reveled in their status as the top dog in the room. Practically everyone in the school seemed intimidated by the protagonist, except for the hero and Toga. Despite this, there was a sense of comfort in knowing that these individuals were under their influence. The next day, during lunch, as the protagonist walked with the flow of students, someone unexpectedly tapped their shoulder. Turning around, they were met with a punch to the face. The impact was jarring, and as they touched their nose, they realized it felt broken. Pain radiated through their face, and blood began to trickle down, staining their uniform. The individual responsible for the attack would soon face consequences. If only they had their knives, the situation would have been different. A crowd quickly formed around them and the assailant. The protagonist recognized the purple-haired attacker but had never interacted with him before. Regaining composure, they smirked at the challenger, who appeared out of breath, likely having rushed into the confrontation without a plan. The surrounding students made it difficult to escape, and with the hallway congested, a pro-hero would likely arrive soon. The protagonist knew they had to handle this situation swiftly. As the tension escalated, someone in the crowd yelled a warning to the purple-haired boy, identified as Shinso, questioning his reckless actions. It became clear that Shinso had a personal motive for the attack, revealing that the protagonist had killed his father. This revelation provided context for the punch, and the protagonist acknowledged that it was a valid reason for Shinsu's anger. The protagonist considered their options. They had likely targeted Shinsu's father due to a bounty, and now they needed to adopt a defensive strategy. Engaging in a fight could jeopardize their plans to convince the staff to grant them freedom, which was a priority. Before they could finish their thought, the protagonist found themselves immobilized, realizing that Shinsu's quirk allowed him to control others. They needed to break free from this trance quickly. As Shinso approached, the protagonist braced for an impending attack, understanding the anger driving Shinsu's actions. In a moment of vulnerability, the protagonist admitted to killing Shinsu's father, feeling the weight of Shinsu's power over them. They recognized that if they had the chance to eliminate a notorious criminal, they would seize it without hesitation, just as other villains would. Suddenly, a sharp pain in the protagonist's left arm broke the trance. They looked to see Toga standing behind them, holding a pencil stained with their blood. The pain had restored their ability to move. Toga, looking somewhat regretful for only managing to land one hit, decided to leave the scene, promising to return another day. Now alone with Shinso, the protagonist chose to remain silent, despite the urge to taunt him. With a broken nose and an injured arm, they were at a disadvantage, but their fighting experience would serve them well. They had learned never to underestimate an opponent. As the crowd watched, Uraraka called out, expressing concern for the protagonist. They reassured her that they were merely retaliating against Shinso for the earlier attack. The urgency of the situation pressed on them. They needed to end the fight before pro-heroes arrived. The protagonist stealthily moved behind Shinso, who appeared frozen in fear. Sensing his anxiety, the protagonist seized the opportunity and delivered a powerful punch to his gut, causing him to double over in pain. Leaning closer, they whispered a warning about the importance of having a backup plan in a fight. Just then, pro-heroes, led by Aizawa, rushed down the hallway. Some students dispersed to avoid trouble, while others cleared a path for the teachers. The protagonist stood up and approached the teachers, who likely assumed they were about to inflict serious harm on Shinso. At least they had managed to instill a moment of fear in them. One of the teachers checked on Shinso, while Aizawa turned his attention to the protagonist, instructing them to follow. They complied, entering an empty classroom where Aizawa expressed his frustration about the protagonist's tendency to cause trouble. The protagonists defended themselves, noting that they had only been on school grounds for a week and deserved some credit. As the door opened, Toga entered the room alongside the teacher from Class 1B, the Blood Hero. Toga still had traces of the protagonist's blood on her, and they couldn't help but be surprised that she hadn't attacked them sooner. She waited for the perfect moment to strike, hoping to catch her target off guard. Ironically, the moment she chose was also beneficial for him, as it snapped him out of his trance. Toga had something she wanted to express to Eraser, the teacher. The Blood Hero, observing the situation, prompted her to share her thoughts. Toga conveyed her relief that she hadn't succeeded in her initial intent, her voice tinged with disappointment. Vlad King insisted that she needed to apologize, but Toga's words carried a different weight in the villain world. In that society, a phrase like, "I'm sorry," often felt insincere, almost mocking. Instead, her statement about being glad she hadn't killed him was a compliment, indicating her appreciation for his resilience and potential to fight another day. The stark contrast between the hero and villain worlds was evident. Heroes were often oblivious to the complexities of villain perspectives. Afterward, he was taken to Recovery Girl, who used her quirk to heal him. Her abilities were impressive, and while he mused about how advantageous it would be to have her on the villain side, he doubted she would ever establish allegiances. Following his recovery, he headed to lunch, where he found the food surprisingly enjoyable, far better than the gas station meals he was accustomed to. He joined some of the other villain students from different classes. Initially, he had preferred solitude, avoiding the heroes, but now he felt a sense of belonging among the other villains. They shared a common understanding that made him feel more at ease. He believed that stealing from large corporations was acceptable, as it was less cruel than targeting small businesses. As they finished lunch, they returned to class, anticipating the hero lesson that awaited them. The excitement of what was to come filled him with anticipation. It was June 1st, and despite the late hour, he felt inspired to write. With exams behind him and school out for the summer, he was eager to share another chapter of his story. In the gym, students were instructed to change into their uniforms and head to the main field. He complied, aware that he was already on Aizawa's watch list. He also wanted to prove he could avoid trouble for at least a week, even though it often seemed to follow him. As they approached the field, he noticed another class already gathered. A sinking feeling hit him when he recognized a familiar figure with yellow hair styled in space buns. It was Toga's class, and he felt a wave of anxiety wash over him at the thought of potentially facing her in a fight. As he joined his classmates, Kirishima enthusiastically greeted a student from Class 1B with an elaborate handshake, showcasing their camaraderie. All Might was leading the session, and the thought of him filled him with irritation. He wished the League would take All Might out of the picture, as it would make their endeavors much easier and more thrilling. All Might explained the day's activities, which involved mixing the two classes into teams for a capture-the-flag-style exercise. As he scanned the room, he noticed many students nodding in understanding. Toga's voice suddenly broke through the chatter, startling him and triggering an instinctive reaction as he swung at her, though she deftly dodged. The teacher announced the teams, and he felt a mix of annoyance and concern when he saw his BRH name listed. Uraraka's voice reached him, expressing her surprise at being on the same team, but he chose to ignore her. Among the members of his team, Toga stood out as someone he could rely on, despite her unpredictable nature. The opposing team boasted formidable contenders, including Todoroki, whom he was eager to face after their previous encounter. As he observed Kirishima interacting with Bakugo, he felt a sense of determination building within him. The upcoming challenge promised to be intense, and he was ready to embrace it. The team was preparing for a mock battle, and the atmosphere was charged with excitement. Aizawa had just explained the rules, emphasizing that the goal was to capture, not kill. After he left, Toga and another student approached a table filled with knives. Toga asked which knives would be chosen, and without responding, the students selected 2 throwing knives, 2 daggers, and 2 regular knives, while Toga opted for 4 daggers and 2 throwing knives. They concealed their weapons in pockets and sleeves before rejoining their classmates. All Might was still outlining the details of the exercise, informing everyone that they would receive wristbands in their team colors to identify each other. The student realized that capturing an opponent's wristband could allow for stealthy tactics. With a blue wristband for their team and red for the opposing team, the student noticed some classmates wearing their wristbands in unconventional ways, like Yaoyorozu, who had placed hers in her hair. As Team 2 moved off in one direction, the student and the rest of Team 1 followed their leader, Vlad King, in another direction. They soon found themselves at opposite ends of a mock city and were given 10 minutes to devise a strategy. The student initiated the discussion by introducing themselves as Deku, a skilled knife user without a quirk, boasting confidence in their abilities. Kaminari stepped forward next, introducing himself as someone who could generate electricity. The mood shifted as classmates began to share their quirks, each contributing to the growing sense of camaraderie. Mineta explained his sticky ball, Sato mentioned his sugar-powered strength, and Azui described her frog-like abilities. Aoyama boasted about his naval laser, while Tokoyami introduced his powerful dark shadow. Uraraka shared her floating quirk, and Koda, though shy, revealed his ability to communicate with animals. Shoji explained his capacity to create additional limbs. Once Team 1 had introduced themselves, Deku turned to Team 2, prompting them to share their quirks as well. Awase described his welding ability, while Tokage explained her capacity to detach parts of her body. The introductions continued, with each student revealing their unique powers, and the student found themselves pleasantly surprised by the strength of their opponents. Uraraka pointed out that one person had yet to introduce themselves, gesturing toward Toga. Toga then declared her name and hinted at her penchant for violence without revealing her quirk. Kaminari, curious and somewhat apprehensive, questioned whether she was also a villain, prompting a bemused reaction from the student. As the gates to the battlefield began to open, excitement surged through the group. While others rushed in, the student turned to Toga, suggesting they team up. Toga eagerly agreed, and together they dashed into the fray, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. As the gates opened, Kendo decided to stick close to Monoma, anticipating that his classmate would be more of a distraction than a threat. They opted for the quieter streets, where they might encounter individual fighters rather than groups. While running, Kendo spotted someone standing over another person in an alleyway. He grabbed Monoma's arm to halt their progress and signaled for silence. Peering around the corner, Kendo saw that the person capturing another was unfamiliar, and the one being captured was Tokoyami, the bird-themed student. Kendo's heart raced at the prospect of intervening, weighing the potential outcomes of their next move. He didn't look okay. The situation was tense, and there was a looming uncertainty about whether he was still alive. Monoma's impatience was evident as he shouted for someone to capture their opponents already. The blue-haired figure turned in their direction, and unease settled in. He approached, hands covering his face and limbs, with multiple hands seemingly emerging from various parts of his body. Each step he took made the observer instinctively retreat. Monoma continued to taunt, oblivious to the danger they were in. The blue-haired figure's expression shifted from arrogance to alarm in an instant, and he muttered something under his breath before lunging at Monoma. The observer instinctively jumped back, bracing for the worst. Meanwhile, Deku and Toga had chosen to navigate the darker alleyways, finding it easier to confront their opponents in such shadows. As they wandered, the loud voice of Monoma reached their ears, filled with insults directed at someone. Deku felt compelled to intervene, thinking Monoma's ego was far too inflated for someone of his intellect. They hurried to catch up with Monoma, and as they stood on a road, Deku spotted Shigaraki cornering two students, one of whom appeared lifeless on the ground. Without thinking, he threw a pencil at Shigaraki, hitting him squarely in the hand just as he was about to unleash his destructive power on Monoma. The action surprised Deku. He was a villain, not a hero, and he hadn't intended to act. It felt like an involuntary reflex. Shigaraki turned angrily toward Deku, while Monoma and Kendo seized the opportunity to escape. Toga rushed over to Shigaraki, playfully claiming that he had missed her. Shigaraki acknowledged her with a casual response, mentioning a job that required her involvement. Their interaction resembled a child engaging with older siblings, one side exuding annoyance while the other remained blissfully unaware. Toga pleaded with Shigaraki not to kill Monoma, and he suggested an alternative. Instead of killing him, they could take him back to their headquarters and torture him. The idea of torture made Deku uneasy, and he considered negotiating with them to avoid such a fate. Ultimately, they decided to bring Monoma along, and before he could voice his objections he was pushed into a portal, finding himself teleported to the League's headquarters. In another part of the city, Todoroki was in shock at the scene unfolding before him. He rushed to Tokoyami, checking for a pulse but finding none. Hearing footsteps, he turned to see Kendo leading several teachers toward them. He stepped aside to allow them to assist Tokoyami. Aizawa pulled him aside, asking what had happened. Todoroki explained that he had been following Deku and recounted how Deku had saved Monoma from Shigaraki's attack. Kendo confirmed Todoroki's account, explaining that Deku had thrown something to distract Shigaraki, which likely saved their lives. As they watched Tokoyami being carried away on a stretcher, Aizawa inquired about the events that followed. Todoroki recounted how Deku had refused to go with the villains, who initially wanted to kill him. However, one of the villains suggested taking him alive for torture instead, and Deku had been pushed into a portal by Toga. Aizawa remained calm, stating they would try to retrieve Deku. Todoroki questioned why they would go to such lengths for someone who was still a villain. Aizawa explained that despite Deku's actions, he was still a student in need of help. As a teacher and hero, it was essential to protect anyone in danger, regardless of their status. He emphasized that Deku was likely facing severe consequences, and the thought of torture by the League was not to be taken lightly. With that, Aizawa followed the medics, leaving Todoroki to process the gravity of the situation. In the main area of their headquarters, Bakugo and the others gathered, anxious for news. Aizawa addressed them, reassuring them that Tokoyami would recover, though he had experienced a critical moment when his heart had stopped. Relief washed over the room, but concern for Deku lingered. They had been left in the dark about his fate, with only the knowledge that two of their classmates were missing. Bakugo recalled a recent conversation with Kirishima, who had urged him to leave quickly during the chaos. It was unusual for them not to be informed about such incidents, especially when someone entered UA without authorization. The uncertainty weighed heavily on them all. There were no alarms sounding, and two individuals stood at the main gate, discussing the situation. One expressed confusion about the lack of information they had received, while the other dismissed the concern, suggesting that those who were missing would eventually return. They then made their way back to the dorms, where they were instructed to stay put for their safety. As the memory faded, one of them reflected on the situation, admitting a sense of relief that a certain individual, known for his avian abilities, was unharmed. He was not as bothersome as some of the others. However, there was an underlying worry about another individual, Deku, who had access to dangerous items and might seek revenge if given the opportunity. Meanwhile, Deku found himself in a frustrating predicament. He noted that the League of Villains seemed to excel only in kidnapping, a tactic that had grown tiresome. Strangely, they had not restrained him, they merely locked him in a basic cell, which consisted of concrete walls, a single light fixture, and a twin-sized mattress on the floor. The door was metal but not heavily fortified, and a drain in the corner suggested a grim purpose. After a day of confinement, he felt boredom creeping in, recalling the last moments before his capture when he had been transported to their headquarters. Hours passed, and the door creaked open, stirring him from his thoughts. A member of the League, whom he recognized but had not formally met, informed him that their leader wished to speak with him. This individual, known as Spinner, had a peculiar appearance reminiscent of an alligator. As they walked down the hallway, Deku noticed a pocket knife in Spinner's possession and attempted to discreetly reach for it. However, his plan was thwarted when another member, Dabi, caught his wrist and took the knife for himself. Despite the tension, Deku greeted Dabi with a smile, recalling their previous encounter that had led to Dabi's capture. Dabi, unfazed, reminded Deku of his role in the events that had unfolded. As Dabi pocketed the knife, Spinner, still confused, realized what had transpired. Dabi coldly refused to return the knife to Spinner and asserted that he would escort Deku to their leader instead. The journey through the hideout was brief, marked by distant screams that were typical of a villain's lair. Upon reaching the bar area, Deku greeted Shigaraki with a bright smile, knowing it would irritate him. Shigaraki inquired about a summer training camp for UA students, prompting Deku to realize that he was being sought for information. Although he had limited knowledge, he understood that failure in their exams would prevent some students from attending the camp, which was set to last about a week and would be beneficial for training. As Deku relayed this information, he noticed the presence of several key members of the League, which made him reconsider any potential escape plans. Shigaraki and Kurojairi exchanged glances, leaving Deku to wonder what they were thinking. Kurojairi listened intently as Deku shared what he knew about the training camp, initially expecting more detailed information. He had intervened earlier to prevent Shigaraki from resorting to torture, as the villain's original plan had involved a taser. After Deku finished, Kurojairi observed Shigaraki's intense demeanor, recognizing the dangerous bloodlust that lingered within him. The atmosphere was tense as Shigaraki and his companions plotted their next move. Shigaraki expressed confidence in their superiority over the students, suggesting that victory would come easily. Deku, caught off guard, felt a surge of confusion and anger as he questioned Shigaraki's intentions. The implication that Shigaraki might actually care about the students struck a nerve, revealing a hidden attachment within Deku that he was reluctant to acknowledge. Deku's internal struggle intensified as he reflected on his past. He had sworn off caring for others after a painful experience with Kaken, believing that he could never form attachments to the heroes he had encountered. Shigaraki's chilling proposition to capture a student and eliminate anyone who stood in their way only added to his turmoil. Deku's thoughts raced. Realizing that if he didn't tread carefully, he could easily find himself in a dangerous situation. As Shigaraki laid out a series of photographs depicting students from Class 1A, including Kaken and others, the gravity of their mission became clear. Kurojairi explained that they sought the students for their unique abilities, intending to use them for experimentation. The stakes were high, and Deku sensed that he was being drawn deeper into their plans than he had anticipated. Shigaraki's demand for Deku to accompany them on their mission was met with dread. The situation was precarious, and Deku understood that he needed to gather more information to navigate this dangerous alliance. The memory of stopping Shigaraki from harming the students haunted him, raising questions about his motives. Despite his claims of indifference, he recognized the truth. He had grown attached to them, even if he was unwilling to admit it. As Toga interrupted his thoughts, Deku realized he had been muttering to himself, a habit he thought he had overcome. Shigaraki's probing questions about his willingness to kill the students forced Deku to confront his conflicting emotions. He knew that to protect himself, he might have to act against those he had come to care for, a realization that weighed heavily on him. The conversation concluded with Shigaraki granting Deku a temporary reprieve, instructing him to return for further instructions. As Deku left, he felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. With the heroes and the League of Villains both on his tail, he found himself trapped in a web of conflicting loyalties and dangerous expectations. The path ahead was uncertain, and he needed to clarify his priorities before making any irreversible decisions. Deku found himself sleeping in a back alley, realizing that returning to his once secret villain hideout was no longer an option. The area was home to a few stray animals, mostly cats and some dogs, wandering aimlessly. As he glanced at a clock in a shop window, he noted that it was around 10:30 p.m. With a plan forming in his mind, he decided to head toward the League's headquarters. For the time being, he intended to comply with the League's demands. He was wanted on 3 different continents, and it was essential to lay low until the situation calmed down. He knew they were planning an attack on a training camp, with a list of individuals they wanted captured alive, while others could be eliminated. Although it seemed straightforward, he struggled with the thought of taking lives. He reminded himself that if he wanted to survive, he had to be willing to do what was necessary. He recalled a statement about not harming anyone who wasn't in his way, which gave him a glimmer of hope. However, he also recognized that the heroes would not allow their friends to be taken without a fight. The heroic nature of his opponents was frustrating. Upon entering the League's bar, he leaned against the far wall and scanned the room. About 10 others were present, some familiar from the previous day, while others were new faces. Shigaraki's voice broke the silence, inquiring about the missing member of their group. Kurogiri responded that they were still waiting for one more person. The atmosphere was tense, though everyone tried to conceal their unease. Toga approached him, playfully calling out to him. He preferred to be called Deku or the Reaper, as it caught their attention. It was surprising to them that a 15-year-old could be the infamous Reaper, and that underestimation was part of his advantage. Toga presented him with a set of knives, which he acknowledged with a mix of gratitude and awkwardness, still adjusting to the villainous persona he was expected to embody. Shigaraki expressed impatience about the arrival of their final member, noting the time. Just then, a larger figure with a hood entered the bar, and Shigaraki began outlining their plan. They would be attacking the training camp where the UA first-year hero students would be present. Given the losses the League had suffered during the USJ attack, it made sense to deploy a smaller, more capable group. Shigaraki detailed the tasks assigned to each member of the group. Dabi and Twice were to create a diversion by burning part of the forest, while others were assigned to handle any heroes in their path. Toga's role was to collect blood from as many individuals as possible, and Mustard was tasked with creating fog to incapacitate their opponents. Moonfish was instructed to eliminate anyone who stood in their way, while Compress was given a list of targets to capture. Muscular was allowed to kill if necessary, and finally, Deku was to capture the individuals on the list while eliminating anyone who obstructed him, with a warning not to get captured again. The pressure weighed on him, and he felt a pang of anxiety, unsure if it stemmed from nerves or fear. Despite this, he maintained a smile, knowing it irritated Shigaraki. The leader made it clear that they had 1 week to prepare for the operation, emphasizing the importance of remaining in the hideout unless instructed otherwise. Deku understood that his presence was likely more about the reputation he brought than his actual abilities. As the meeting concluded, Kurogiri asked if there were any questions. Muscular inquired about the restrictions on leaving the hideout, to which Kurogiri explained the need to avoid arrests. Deku seized the opportunity to ask about acquiring a villain outfit, expressing his reluctance to attack UA in his gym uniform. Kurogiri assured him that they could provide an outfit and other necessary gear. With the meeting over, most members departed to their rooms, while Deku made his way down a long hallway to his own. His room was average, equipped with a bed, a closet, and minimal furnishings. He had little in the way of clothing, making the closet seem almost pointless for now. After settling in, he ventured out to find food, having gone without a proper meal for the past day. He also needed to locate a source for knives, his preferred weapon, as he doubted Shigaraki expected him to rely solely on his bare hands for capturing or eliminating targets. While he could manage without weapons, it would certainly be more challenging. Even if the team Shigi had assembled was powerful, the plan they had this time was solid. Class 1A was in serious trouble. It had been a week since the chaos began. Deku had managed to acquire knives, and the media was in an uproar over how UA had allowed his escape. He had a new villain outfit ready, and tonight was the night they would attack the training camp. During this time, he had formed a bond with Toga over their shared interest in knives and their methods of inflicting harm. The week had been challenging. Many of the other villains were incompetent, entertaining in their own way, but not the kind of people he would invite to a celebration. Deku had made a decision to capture Kaminari. As long as he kept his distance from Kaminari's electricity, he believed he would be fine. His plan was straightforward. He would knock Kaminari out at the first opportunity, making it easier to transport him without any complications. As he prepared, a voice called from the hallway, asking if he was ready. Deku felt prepared and equipped himself with knives hidden in his sleeves and shoes, ensuring he was ready for the task ahead. He joined the others in the bar area, noting their unusual gear but focusing on his mission to capture a student and escape the league without interference. He had laced one of his blades with a tranquilizer, ensuring that anyone he struck would be incapacitated. He needed to be cautious, especially around Kirishima, who could turn to rock form. Just before they were set to leave, Shigi pulled him aside for a private conversation. Shigi mentioned Deku's mother, a subject he had hoped to keep hidden. Anger surged through him as he demanded to know what Shigi had done to her. Shigi's casual tone only fueled his rage as he warned Deku that if he failed in his mission, his mother would be in danger. With that, Shigi walked away, leaving Deku alone in the hallway, his fists clenched in determination. Meanwhile, Uraraka and her partner Tsu had just been sorted into pairs for a courage test in the forest. They were nervous as they navigated the path, encountering strange smoke in the distance, unsure if it was a quirk or something else. Deku, on the other hand, was moving stealthily toward his target. Shigi had sent a Nomu to do the dirty work, which Deku considered a weak move. As he observed the chaos unfolding with smoke and fire, he realized Kaminari must be inside the building. When he spotted a copy of Dabi entering, he seized the moment. He hid around a corner as Eraser and Vlad left the building, chasing after the decoy. Locking the door behind him, he entered the room where the pros had been, finding 6 students inside, 5 from Class 1A and 1 who had nearly been killed during his previous kidnapping. As soon as he entered, all eyes were on him. Kirishima seemed almost relieved to see him, but confusion quickly followed as he questioned Deku's presence. With Kirishima there, Deku decided to take him along as well. He flashed his blade, warning the students that if they wanted to avoid harm, they should send Kaminari and Kirishima over slowly. This would allow him to incapacitate Kaminari with his tranquilizer blade and take down Kirishima before anyone could intervene. Kirishima felt trapped. He considered fighting back, but he was the only one with a quirk that could protect him from knives. He glanced at Denki, sensing that his friend was about to make a reckless move. Deku, noticing Monoma's silence, taunted him, prompting Monoma to boast about his past heroics. In a swift motion, Deku threw a knife that narrowly missed Monoma, using the distraction to position himself behind him, pressing a knife to Monoma's throat. The tension in the room escalated as Deku prepared to execute his plan, leaving the students in a precarious situation. Deku was aware of the tension in the air as he faced the group. He had saved one of them from a dangerous encounter with a notorious villain named Shigaraki, who was known for his unsettling appearance and the hands that adorned his body. The irony of being saved by a villain was not lost on him, and he found it amusing to think about how the others would react to that revelation. He considered the situation carefully, knowing that he needed to assert control. He addressed the group, urging them to cooperate. It would be a waste to harm someone he had previously saved. He recalled the ego of the person he had rescued, knowing that it would be hard for anyone to forget such a personality. As he assessed the group, he sensed their hesitation and uncertainty. Kirishima, one of the members, seemed eager to understand Deku's intentions. He asked what Deku planned to do once they complied with his request. Deku contemplated whether to provide a reassuring answer or the truth. He decided to offer both, knowing that the situation required transparency. Monoma, another member of the group, remarked on Deku's tendency to enjoy the sound of his own voice, which prompted a retort from Deku about the irony of that statement. Deku explained that the group likely wanted him to instruct them to fight against other villains, betraying the trust of those who believed in him. However, he had a different plan in mind, one he would reveal if they simply approached him. He watched as Kaminari, another member, expressed his confidence in his ability to walk, though Deku wondered if Kaminari truly understood the gravity of their predicament. Meanwhile, Kaminari was grappling with his own thoughts. He considered using his powers to incapacitate everyone in the room, but he hesitated, realizing that such an action could leave them vulnerable to further attacks. He was fatigued from training, which would limit his effectiveness. The idea of targeting Deku crossed his mind, but he was conflicted about the potential consequences. As the standoff continued, Deku sensed that the group was stalling for time, likely waiting for a pro-hero to intervene. He decided to take the initiative. In a swift motion, he pushed Monoma into Kirishima, ensuring that Monoma was slightly injured to introduce a tranquilizer into his system. While the others were distracted, he moved quickly to incapacitate Kirishima as well. With two of his targets down, Deku felt a surge of urgency. He approached the remaining members of the group, who instinctively took fighting stances. He knew that facing them all at once would be challenging, but he was determined to secure his objectives. As he advanced, he noticed a peculiar communication happening among the group, likely a quirk that allowed them to strategize without speaking. Kaminari acknowledged that they no longer needed to hold back, while Ashido cautioned him to be careful. It became clear to Deku that they had been given the green light to fight back if necessary. He understood that they would not allow him to leave with one of their friends without a struggle. The stakes were high. He needed to act decisively. Deku positioned himself in front of the unconscious individuals, knives in hand. He threw one knife toward Ashido, forcing her to react defensively, and then quickly targeted her leg to incapacitate her further. With Ashido distracted by her injury, he seized the opportunity to tranquilize Kaminari, adding him to the pile of unconscious friends. As he surveyed the scene, he noted that the group had not attempted to attack him. He wondered if they had grown too attached to him to take decisive action against him. Ashido was now on the ground, and Siro was tending to her wound, demonstrating a level of teamwork that was both impressive and concerning for Deku. He taunted the remaining members, questioning whether they would ever attack or if he would simply continue picking them off one by one. The tension hung heavy in the air as he prepared for whatever would come next, knowing that he had to remain vigilant and ready for anything. The tension in the air was palpable as the protagonist decided to take the initiative. They realized that if Eraser had arrived, their mother would be in grave danger. With determination, they threw a knife near Sato's head and another at his leg, employing the same tactic twice. Sato fell to the ground in pain, leaving Siro as the last standing opponent, who looked on with pleading eyes. The protagonist offered Siro the chance to bandage his friend's leg to prevent him from bleeding out, and Siro nodded in agreement. He knelt beside his injured friend, taping his leg as he had done for Ashido. Once Siro stood up, he faced the protagonist, ready to fight. The protagonist expressed their frustration, wishing Siro would understand the futility of his actions and let them take who they needed without interference. However, Siro was determined to be a hero and protect his friends, which the protagonist saw as a losing battle. Siro launched tape at the protagonist, who dodged but was caught by a second piece of tape that stuck to their face. As Siro pulled them in, the protagonist swiftly drew a tranquilizer knife and struck him as soon as he was within reach, peeling the tape off their face afterward. With a sense of urgency, The protagonist approached the two injured individuals and used the tranquilizer knife on them, ensuring they wouldn't heal too quickly. Now burdened with carrying both, they felt the weight of their actions slow them down significantly. After dragging the unconscious individuals into the woods, the protagonists sought a vantage point. They recalled a nearby cliff that could provide the necessary visibility to signal Kurogiri for teleportation. The plan seemed solid, but they hoped to avoid any encounters along the way. Meanwhile, Koda felt a surge of fear as he faced a large villain who seemed intent on causing harm. Just when he thought he was alone, another villain appeared, carrying two unconscious heroes. The sight of them filled Koda with dread, realizing he was trapped with two dangerous individuals. The larger villain expressed annoyance at the other for being one of Shigaraki's favorites, while the green-haired villain responded with laughter, causing Koda to retreat against the wall in fear. The green-haired villain dropped his burden and addressed the larger one, indicating that he was merely trying to survive and questioned the need to torment someone as defenseless as Koda. The tension escalated, and as the green-haired villain approached Koda with a knife, he knelt down to meet his gaze, suggesting that he should focus on more challenging prey. Koda, feeling cornered, decided to stand his ground, asserting that he was not a child. As the confrontation intensified, Koda seized the opportunity to escape, running toward the exit. The larger villain shouted that he was getting away, while the green-haired one dismissed the threat, implying that Koda would not be able to alert anyone. The thought crossed Koda's mind that perhaps the heroes were already incapacitated, and he felt a surge of urgency to escape. He glanced back at the cliff and noticed blood spilling over the edge, a sight that filled him with dread for the heroes' safety. As he continued to run, he spotted someone in the distance, hoping it was an adult. It turned out to be a weary teacher, and he rushed to get their attention, breathlessly informing them of the villains and the blood he had seen. The teacher, aware of the situation, quickly led Koda to safety inside the classroom building. However, upon entering, they were met with a shocking sight. 3 students were unconscious, along with one from Class 1B. The teacher instinctively moved to shield Koda from the scene, but Koda pushed past, rushing to help his classmates using his water quirk to wash away some of their injuries. In the midst of the chaos, he realized that 2 students, Kirishima and Kaminari, were missing. Concerned for their safety, the teacher rushed out to find them. Eventually, the teacher reached the cliff where the blood was pooling, praying it did not belong to their students. Climbing up, they spotted Deku lifting 2 of the missing students, preparing to throw them into a portal. The teacher called out, hoping to stop him before it was too late. Deku turned, momentarily caught off guard, revealing a face that lacked the villainous intent they had feared. Aizawa recognized a villain when he saw one, and Deku appeared to be a broken child in need of help. As Deku looked at Aizawa, he expressed his frustration, insisting that Aizawa could not possibly understand his situation. Aizawa felt compelled to intervene, realizing that he might have to confront Deku with force. As Deku set Kirishima down, a tear glistened in his eye, suggesting that he was reluctant to fight but felt he had no choice. He took out his knives and assumed a fighting stance, his gaze unwavering. Aizawa prepared himself, knowing that he had studied Deku's training and was familiar with his moves. When Deku threw the first knife, Aizawa blocked it, followed by the second. He recognized that Deku's reflexes were sharp and not to be underestimated. Aizawa attempted to use his scarf to ensnare Deku, but Deku dodged and countered. Aizawa swiftly moved behind him, wrapping the scarf around Deku's leg and pulling him down. A small injury appeared on Deku's shoulder, likely from his own blade. Struggling to regain his footing, Deku disregarded his knives and staggered toward Kirishima and Kaminari, dragging them toward a portal. Just as they reached the portal, Deku collapsed, unable to send anyone through. In a faint whisper, he expressed a desperate plea to save his mother before losing consciousness. Aizawa was left to ponder the gravity of the situation. Earlier, Deku had moved Muscular's body to the edge of a cliff, spotting Shigaraki and Kurogiri above. Kurogiri opened a portal as Deku prepared to move another body, but Aizawa's desperate shout halted him. Aizawa's presence weighed heavily on Deku, who felt the burden of sending his classmates to danger. Despite knowing that his actions were wrong, he felt trapped in his role as a villain, driven by the fear of what might happen to his mother. In a moment of panic, Deku insisted that Aizawa could not understand the stakes he faced. He dropped Kirishima and prepared for a confrontation, taking out 2 knives. Aizawa, having observed Deku's fighting style, anticipated his moves and successfully deflected the knives. Realizing he needed to change tactics, Deku replaced one of his knives with a laced one. As the fight escalated, Aizawa's scarf ensnared Deku's ankle, causing him to fall. In the chaos, Deku accidentally cut himself with his own knife. With his strength waning, he struggled to lift Kirishima but ultimately collapsed, his eyelids growing heavy. In his final moments of consciousness, he uttered a plea to save his mother before succumbing to darkness. When Deku awoke, he found himself in a stark white room, lying on a bed with a large glass window. He noticed people bustling on the other side, likely reacting to his awakening. Aizawa entered the room, and although others remained, he dismissed them, wanting to speak privately. Deku felt a wave of regret wash over him, realizing that his failure to capture Aizawa had jeopardized his mother's safety. Aizawa broke the silence, revealing that Deku's mother was alive and safe. This news sparked a flicker of hope within Deku. Aizawa explained how they had tracked the League of Villains, thanks to the efforts of Yaoyorozu and other students. They had managed to rescue Deku's mother and apprehend several members of the League, including Muscular, who had been found dead. Deku processed the information, realizing that Muscular's death was a consequence of his actions. Aizawa continued, detailing the capture of other villains during the attack. The mention of Shigaraki's name brought a chuckle from Deku, who found a moment of dark humor in imagining his former ally behind bars. Aizawa informed Izuku that the rehabilitation program at UA had been shut down due to negative media coverage, which had led to funding cuts from the Board of Education. He explained that there were several people waiting to speak with Izuku, and for security reasons, only a limited number of visitors would be allowed at a time. Aizawa then asked if Izuku wanted to see his mother, to which Izuku was taken aback, struggling to process the thought of her visit. Aizawa left the room. 3 security personnel entered, heightening Izuku's anxiety about his situation. He wondered if his former classmates were also imprisoned nearby and contemplated the possibility of earning more privileges if he displayed good behavior, though he doubted it. The sound of a key card unlocking the door interrupted his thoughts, and the door slowly opened. His mother entered, tears in her eyes, and Izuku felt a tear escape down his own cheek as he recognized her. The sight of her brought forth a wave of emotion, and he pressed his hand against the glass that separated them, mirroring her actions. They both cried, lost in the moment despite the presence of the guards. Izuku's mother expressed her disbelief that her son was alive but imprisoned, struggling to reconcile the reality that her son was now labeled a villain. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and Izuku felt the weight of her disappointment. He attempted to explain that his circumstances were complicated, but she insisted that he could not blame his childhood friend for his actions. As Izuku looked down, he acknowledged the truth in her words. He had made choices that led him to this point, and he felt the burden of his mother's anguish. She pleaded with him not to plan an escape, revealing the toll his absence had taken on her. The thought of her sleepless nights filled him with guilt, and he realized how deeply his actions had affected her. His mother continued, expressing her hope that he could find a way to re-enter society as a decent person. Izuku struggled with how to respond, torn between wanting to comfort her and being honest about his feelings. She recounted a moment when villains had invaded their home, and how one of them had told her about Izuku's new identity. She had refused to believe it, recalling the happy, kind-hearted boy he once was. Izuku reassured her that it wasn't her fault and that he would try to find a way to improve himself. Their emotional exchange was interrupted by a guard announcing that visiting time was over. His mother protested, but Izuku comforted her, promising he would be there when she returned. They exchanged words of love before she left, the door closing behind her. As he leaned against the wall of his cell, he prepared for the next visitor. When Bakugo entered, Izuku was surprised to see him. Bakugo revealed that he had lost a bet, which required him to visit Izuku until he was kicked out. Izuku seized the opportunity to ask for details about the bet, eager to know what had transpired. Bakugo remained silent, and Izuku felt a surge of frustration. He playfully threatened to share embarrassing childhood stories with the press, which visibly unsettled Bakugo. Eventually, Bakugo caved and agreed to share the details of the bet, revealing that he had lost a challenge to name everyone in their class. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all, realizing that even in his current situation, he could still find moments of humor. The exchange with Bakugo, filled with tension and camaraderie, reminded him of the bonds they had shared even amidst the chaos of their lives. The events unfolded in a rather unexpected manner. The protagonist had been out for some time, and upon regaining consciousness, he found himself in a conversation that felt oddly familiar. He was curious about the date and time, and upon receiving the information, he felt a sense of satisfaction. The conversation took a turn when he brought up the need for an apology. The other person seemed confused, questioning what they should apologize for. The protagonist, feigning a search for a non-existent list, began to enumerate the grievances he had endured over the years. He mentioned the years of torment and a particularly hurtful comment about taking a swan dive off a roof. With a piercing glare, he demanded the apology he felt was long overdue. Eventually, the other person relented, offering a half-hearted apology for the years of torment and the insensitive comment. Surprisingly, this exchange went better than the protagonist had anticipated. It seemed that threatening the other person's hero career had been an effective tactic. As the silence stretched between them, the protagonist lay back on his bed, contemplating the situation. He knew that the other person would soon be asked to leave, and indeed, they departed quickly. The protagonist considered the possibility of leaving himself but decided that for now, serving his time wouldn't be so bad. He found a strange enjoyment in the idea of more visitors, especially after the thrill of tormenting Kaken. At least he had managed to extract an apology, which felt like a small victory in the grand scheme of things. As the narrative drew to a close, the protagonist reflected on the events that had transpired. There was a sense of fulfillment in having confronted his past and the person who had caused him pain. He looked forward to the potential of new stories and adventures, hinting at a continuation of his journey. The struggle with his darker impulses and the complexities of his character would remain central to his story, promising further exploration in the chapters to come. With a sense of hope for the future, he prepared himself for whatever lay ahead, ready to face new challenges and perhaps even new friendships along the way. There was what felt like an eternity of silence. The narrator tried to ease the emotional pain of Baku by asking how he knew the villain. To their surprise, Baku began to share his story. He explained that he and Deku had grown up together as friends, although he had often taken charge in their relationship. Both had aspired to be heroes, or so Baku had thought. As he reflected on their past, Baku revealed that Deku was kind-hearted, and he had bullied him. After being accepted into UA, Baku left Deku behind and lost contact with him, eventually forgetting about their friendship. A wave of sadness washed over Baku as he recalled a call he received from Inko, Deku's mother, weeks after arriving at UA. She had asked if he knew where Deku was. When asked what he had told her, Baku's voice broke as he admitted that he had dismissed her concerns, suggesting that Deku was probably off playing hero. That very day, headlines reported a new villain on the streets, claiming 58 lives. The thought that Deku could have been among the victims haunted Baku, especially after discovering that Deku was the one responsible for the chaos. As Baku fiddled with his cuticles and shook with emotion, the narrator struggled to find the right words to comfort him. They asked if he felt responsible for what had happened, knowing the answer was likely clear. Baku confirmed his guilt, recalling how he had told Deku he would be better off as a villain, emphasizing that both he and villains were good at being stepped on. He had kicked Deku in the gut and walked away. The narrator acknowledged the depth of Baku's regret, hoping he understood the importance of making amends. Baku, still crying and trembling, expressed doubt that Deku would want anything to do with him, believing that Deku only regretted not retaliating harder when they were at UA. Though Baku had stopped crying, he remained shaky. The narrator attempted to reassure him, suggesting that Deku's actions were typical of a villain trying to provoke him. Baku felt a sense of karma for his past behavior, believing he was being punished for his previous actions. The narrator reminded Baku that if this was karma, he had the support of his friends, the Baku Squad, who would stand by him and not let the villain ruin his life. They even joked that Denki could help if needed, which brought a chuckle from Baku. Despite the light-hearted moment, Baku insisted he needed to face his own battles. They left the room and entered the kitchen, relieved to find the villain was no longer there. The day continued as they played video games until early afternoon, deciding to go out for food with the rest of the Baku squad. Throughout the day, the narrator was inundated with text messages from friends curious about Baku's emotional state. Later that night, after receiving Baku's permission, the narrator shared a brief overview of what Baku had confided in them with a crowd of intrigued classmates.